back over to the UK, right? It's out of range. It doesn't have the ability to make it there. It just the question is how the hell did the U.S. pull that off? Where the hell did those birds come from? And I think that's just something that they don't want to release to us, which is really interesting. Then we go and we take a look at this. Helicopters and at least one Coast Guard vessel were being used to take control of the tanker on Wednesday under the Coast Guard's law enforcement authority. But we know the Department of War was also there. And this is kind of reminiscent of Venezuela when we ripped Maduro out. Like, we're serving a federal warrant with CAG. The officials said tanker captains and mechanics would be sent on board to operate the ship. The U.S. brought in P-8 Poseidon sub-hunter aircraft and, get this, an AC-130J gunship to help with the boarding operation, according to flight tracking data and 2 U.S. officials. That is another chunk of information that I didn't even pick up on. So not only did we have little birds, but we also had AC-130 Spectre gunships that were out there. Those things are freaking huge. They got a dang tank cannon on them, for crying out loud. They got a 30 millimeter chain gun on them. Those things don't play. I've had them support me over in combat operations. Those things are freaking rad. Why the hell did we have a freaking AC-130 circling overhead? We were expecting something huge, and we're expecting the Russians to defend that ship tooth and nail. And yet the Department of State's been pretty quiet. The Department of War announced that we ended up taking the sucker. Great. But what we were doing and what we were after, man, we don't get a lot. I see people saying those birds take off from submarines. Nah, I don't think so. Nope. You can, they're tiny. I mean, you can fold them up and put them in the back of a little ship. You can do all sorts of things with them. So, little birds, operators, Spectre gunships, P-8 Poseidon sub-hunter, Russia sent in subs after it, and the dang thing was en route from Iran. And what was on that ship, I think, is going to be the real questions. Yeah, and Texas Actual saying the Russians didn't arrive in time. No, I think the Russians got tipped off at all the flight tracking data that we were covering and just knew that likely we're going to go interdict that ship where it was at. And by the way, this is not the only ship of concern that the United States has been boarding recently. I'll bring this up as well. Let me see if I've got the full article right here. This is just Pete Hegseth. White House to hold briefing after the U.S. Okay, so is the White House briefing on it right now? No, the White House is not briefing on it yet, so I'm going to go ahead and mute that, and we'll be back over to check on it. But the White House is going to be conducting a briefing here momentarily. But I want to show you guys this. Back in November, U.S. Special Forces seized a cargo ship off the coast of Sri Lanka linked to Iran's missile program. Ship was en route. All right, it was a cargo ship, and it was carrying components from China, and they were heading over to Iran. U.S. forces ended up boarding the ship. This information came out on December 12th, 2025. U.S. forces ended up boarding the ship, taking the freaking components off of it and blowing the crap out of them and releasing the crew and sending them on their way. The amount of components was freaking huge. And again, this was in November. And when I go back and I reference to you guys, here we go. I want to make sure we have this up on the screen so we can hear it. When I go back and I reference to you guys about Russia and China and everybody kind of like being up at the top and who we need to pay attention to, that this is in particular, what I'm talking about. All right. So we've got assets that were coming in. Excuse me. We got assets that were coming in from China over into Iran. We've got ships that are moving from Iran over into Venezuela, and we've got all sorts of crazy stuff that are aboard those particular vessels, which should bother the hell out of everybody because the U.S. sent some of our most elite forces out of it. And I'm really curious when Hegseth comes out, if he's going to even bring that up, if he's going to mention what they had on that ship. It's a very good question. Wow, man, I ended up putting that graphic way down low. I thought it was better than that. Where is that graphic, man? I lost that sucker. Give me just a sec. There she is. This goes back into everything that I've been telling you guys about for the longest time. That up top, you've got Russia and China, then you've got Iran, then you've got Hezbollah, Venezuela, and Yemen. Hezbollah, Venezuela, and Yemen. Hezbollah, obviously, major terror organization getting funding from Iran. Venezuela, huge freaking problem with them funneling with Iran, moving oil up over into China and getting paid to fund their freaking ballistic missile program and their uranium enrichment program. Then you also have Russia that was providing the scientists to Iran for their uranium enrichment program. Then you've got Yemen, who's currently in the hot seat. Right now, Saudi Arabia is looks like they've invaded and started conducting a ground war over there, and we'll have more to follow on that in a little bit for what's going on. But I also need to bring this up to you while we're waiting on the White House to come up and give their speech. I've got it pulled up on my screen over here, watching it, so you guys don't have to worry about missing it. Chance of nukes or weapons? Yeah, absolutely. To answer Level Patton, nukes or weapons? Yes, it is possible that they had weapons on there. I mean, on the low end, I'd say like the most, or not the low end, on the high end for like most likely case, if there are weapons on that ship, I would say S-300s, S-400s to help protect Venezuela from a U.S. invasion, which is why we started interdicting those ships when we did. That's not confirmed, and we're probably not going to hear about it. Maybe we will when SecDef comes out with it. Matt Borges says, why do people say World War III is around the corner? I don't see any country having the capacity at the moment to have a massive conflict, not even China. Matt, that's exactly what I was just talking about when I had this graphic up and I reference this. Because right now, when we have failed talks with Russia and we have China going after the U.S. strategic assets, that's where World War III comes into play. Personally, when I look at it, China has been waging a war against the United States financially, which is why the sanctions, or not the sanctions, but the tariffs put in place by Donald Trump were kind of a big deal at the very beginning, got a lot of kickback from China on it. China, on the other hand, along with India, has kind of cornered the silver market, which is why you see those increase in prices right now. U.S. is just in a massive supply deficit as far as our silver goes. Banks allegedly are holding on to hundreds of million ounces, but they're not going to sell that crap because they're just going to allow that price to go up. Defense industry ended up putting, no kidding, the Department of War put $2 billion into I think it was $2 billion into a brand new smelter in partnership with other mineral asset companies. Cutting off Venezuelan oil going into China drastically hurts their economy. And same thing when we start talking about the price drop in oil that you're looking at, price per barrel. I'd love to say the United States government actually cares about you, but the reality is the more we cut down the price of oil, the more it hurts Russia, because 30% of their GDP comes from their sale of oil. If we take out Iran, Iran's a key supplier of munitions and technology over to Russia in this war that they're waging over inside of Ukraine. So we've got all of these things that are kind of starting to come together. That's why people are motioning towards World War III. Not to mention that Iran's about to fall. So it's a huge problem. And again, we're still waiting to hear from the White House. They haven't came up yet. I've got it on my screen. Hegseth is not out yet, but we're expecting this conference from him sometime in the near future. I'm watching it. They're not up there yet, but as soon as he starts talking, you better believe I'll shut up and put it up on the screen for you guys. Now, that is one case. I told you guys about China, right? Having their shipments interdicted by U.S. Special Forces just a couple months ago. And here I want to present this case to you guys. This is the Maritime Executive, all right, an article from them. Ooh, we got some movement over in the White House. Nobody's walked up to the podium yet, but this is an article from the Maritime Executive. Lost Russian ship was carrying nuclear submarine reactor parts. This article is dated December 28th, 2025, and it talks about a ship that ended up going missing called the Ursa Major or Ursa Major. It ended up going missing. The dang thing allegedly got sunk. All of this took part in December of 2024 over in the Strait of Gibraltar, right? That would be that last path, if you will, across the Atlantic on the way over to Venezuela that the Iranian/Russian ship we just took was traveling on, if you guys can refer in your brains back to that map. But this sucker was eastbound. And people were saying it was carrying weapons over into Syria. All right. That's what they're alleging, was that it was going eastbound, traveling over into Syria. I almost feel like I need to Google Maps this for some people so that you guys can see the line that it goes over to get to the Med and leads up to Syria. But just take my word on that. Anyways, this ship magically ended up, how do you want to say, sending out a freaking distress signal. All right. And Spanish authorities ended up picking up on it. When the Spanish authorities arrived, we'll finish that in just a sec. She's up. Hold on.
All right. Dr. Carson, come on up. Thank you so much. Good morning and Happy New Year, everybody. It's great to see you. It's great to be with a very packed room. I'm sorry we kept you all very busy over the holiday break. And I know there is a lot of news out there today, both here at home and around the world. I will be happy to take all of your questions. Health Transformation Program, an unprecedented $50 billion investment established under President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. The Trump administration has also worked with 18 states across the country to ban junk food purchases using SNAP benefits starting this year. And thank you for leading that effort, Secretary Rollins. Additionally, President Trump took historic action to secure most favored nation drug pricing and secured deals with major pharmaceutical companies to massively lower the cost of prescription drugs. And those effects are being implemented as we speak. Americans are going to continue to see the result of these incredible deals the president cut. And I know President Trump and this team behind me worked incredibly hard to lower those drug costs for Americans. On Monday, the CDC adopted common sense updates to America's childhood vaccination schedule based solely on the gold standard of science. This action empowers parents and physicians to make the best individualized decisions to protect our children, while also restoring much needed confidence in our public health system. And as a Maha mom myself, I'm very grateful for that. So thank you, Secretary Kennedy. To build on this progress, the Trump administration is now updating federal nutrition standards and guidelines to ensure that Americans have the most accurate, data-driven information supported by science and hard facts, not special interests or partisan ideology. President Trump has tasked two of the great individuals behind me, USDA Secretary Rollins and HHS Secretary Kennedy, with collaborating on this vitally important project. And today they are here to officially unveil the 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines for America. These new guidelines are informed by the best and most reliable research on health and nutrition, particularly as it relates to the role of our diets in the prevalence of chronic disease in the country. They are also These guidelines are easy to read and understand, so every American, young and old, can access this information that literally has the power to change lives. But these are not just an updated guideline. These are the foundation to all federal food programs in our country. These new guidelines are going to update the food that is served to America's children in our public schools, to the plates that are served to our great men in uniform in our military, our veterans, and the food that they are consuming at the VA. And these new guidelines are also going to impact nutritional programs for the needy in our country, such as WIC and Head Start. Unfortunately, for decades, federal dollars has promoted low-quality, highly processed foods that lead to scores of long-term health issues, which means Americans have gone broke because of these health issues. Faulty dietary guidelines of the past stacked the deck against healthy eating and food options for everyday American families, which has fueled the chronic disease epidemic and jacked up the healthcare costs of households across the country. This failed approach in our public health system ends today. When these guidelines are followed, Americans will be saving themselves thousands of dollars. If we want to cut healthcare costs in our country, we must become a healthier country. According to the CEA, poor diet is the root cause of obesity, which accounts for $400 billion in medical spending each year. A healthier America will lead to a more affordable America. The new dietary guidelines from the Trump administration will ensure federal dollars go to real food to improve public health and therefore save the American people their hard-earned cash over the course of their lives. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Secretary Kennedy. The great people behind me will give remarks, and then we'll get into Q&A for the officials that are here on this specific topic. They will leave because they're all very busy people, and then I will open it up to Q&A with the rest of you on the rest of the news in the world. So thank you, and we'll start with Secretary Kennedy. Thank you.
Within Venezuela, so that the opposition forces can be amnestied and released and from prisons or brought back to the country and begin to rebuild civil society. And then the third phase, of course, will be one of transition. Some of this will overlap. I've described this to them in great detail. We'll have more detail in the days to follow. But we feel like we're moving forward here in a very positive way.
How long will this take, Secretary? Some senators who were in that briefing describing your operation variously is that you're winging it, that there's no plan for Venezuela going forward.
Yeah, I know. They're going to say that. I used to be a senator too. That's what you always say when it's the other party. The bottom line is we've gone into great detail with them about the planning. We've described it to them. In fact, it's not just winging it. It's not just saying or speculating it's going to happen. It's already happening. Like the oil arrangement that we've made with PDVSA on their sanctioned oil that they can't move. Understand, they are not generating any revenue from their oil right now. They can't move it unless we allow it to move because we have sanctions, because we're enforcing those sanctions. This is tremendous leverage. We are exercising it in a positive way. The president described it last night. Secretary Wright will have more to say on it today, who is involved in running this portfolio. And we feel very positive that not only will that generate revenue that will be used to the benefit of the Venezuelan people, and we're ensured that that's what the case is, but it also gives us an amount of leverage and influence and control over how this process is.
Mr. Secretary, on Denmark, why is the administration not taking Denmark's offer to discuss the situation in Greenland? And
I'll be meeting with them next week.
Or will you take military intervention off the table?
I'm not here to talk about Denmark or military intervention. I'll be meeting with them next week. We'll have those conversations with them then. And but I'm not having anything further to add to that today.
Can you clarify your comments to lawmakers? Does the U.S. intend to buy Greenland? Does the U.S. intend to buy Greenland? Can you clarify your comments to lawmakers this week?
Well, that's always been the president's intent from the very beginning. He said it very early on. I mean, this is not new. He talked about it in his first term, and he's not the first U.S. president that has examined or looked at how could we acquire Greenland. There's an interest there. But so I just reminded them of the fact that not only did Truman want to do it, but President Trump's been talking about this since his first term.
What? A statement last night saying that the military option.
You've lost a lot of weight. Good job, man.
They said the military option is on the table. So is the administration really willing to risk the NATO alliance by potentially moving ahead?
Guys,
military option?
What I think the White House said yesterday is what I will tell you now, and I've always said. The president always retained the option. Every president, not this president, every president always retains the option. I'm not talking about Greenland. I'm just talking about globally. If the president identifies a threat to the national security of the United States, every president retains the option to address it through military means. As a diplomat, which is what I am now, and what we work on, we always prefer to settle it in different ways. That included in Venezuela. We tried repeatedly to reach an outcome here that did not involve having to go in and grab an indicted drug trafficker. Those were unsuccessful, unfortunately.
Well, Venezuela, the people of Venezuela are waking up to the same regime. Do you not worry about that?
Well, first of all, the bottom line is that there is a process now in place where we have tremendous control and leverage over what those interim authorities are doing and are able to do. But obviously this will be a process of transition. In the end, it will be up to the Venezuelan people to transform their country. We are prepared under the right conditions, using the leverage that we have, which includes the fact that they cannot move any oil unless we allow them to move it. Well, again, I'm not going to give you a timeline on it. We want it to move as soon as possible. But we didn't expect this would, it's been 3 days since this happened, 4 days since this happened. So I understand that in this cycle and society we now live in, everyone wants instant outcomes. They want it to happen overnight. It's not going to work that way. But we're already seeing progress with this new deal that's been announced and more deals to follow. You're already seeing how the leverage the United States have over those interim authorities is going to begin to lead to positive outcomes. It doesn't cost us. It doesn't cost us.
The involvement, the U.S. involvement in Venezuela, how much will it cost?
Well, it isn't going to cost us any money. For example, this oil deal that's happening doesn't cost us any money. On the contrary, and if it opens up,
costs no money.
Well, these look, I don't have the numbers. What operation are you talking about? The entire thing?
Yeah.
Well, these troops are going to be deployed. None of these troops sit in a dry dock waiting for action. They're deployed somewhere in the world. If they're not here, they're somewhere else. Just today, our forces not deployed to the Caribbean seized a boat, a sanctioned boat tied to the IRGC that tried to flee from us. That happened somewhere else. We are constantly involved in action. We have boats in the Mediterranean. We have ships in the Middle East. We have ships in the Indo-Pacific. These ships, if they weren't in the Caribbean, they'd be somewhere else conducting activity. Yeah. That's what the Navy does.
I want to emphasize that. Question from CNN. The question's never asked how much does it cost when they're in the Mediterranean or the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean or the Pacific. But now that they're in our hemisphere, on a counter-cartel mission or ensuring that an indicted individual comes to justice, now you're asking the question of cost. It's a disingenuous question to begin with. You're trying to find any angle possible to undermine the success of one of the most historic military missions the world has ever seen. The level of sophistication that Senate just was briefed on and the House was briefed on, a classified level, is something only the United States of America can accomplish. The world is taking notice of that. Certainly Venezuela is taking notice of that. And it continues because 2 oil tankers, 2 overnight, were seized by the United States of America, stateless or sanctioned, because the oil blockade, the quarantine of oil out of unsanctioned or stateless, sanctioned or stateless vessels continues. That leverage will continue as Secretary Rubio outlined. So our military is prepared to continue this. As he said, the president, when he speaks, he means it. He's not messing around. We're an administration of action to advance our interests, and that is on full display. We're happy to brief the House.
No. 2 quick things. Okay, number one, because we have to go, because we got to brief the House, and if we don't and they're pissed at us, you guys better defend us. That was because we were talking to you. I would make one more point, and it's a very interesting point. One of those ships that was seized that had oil in the Caribbean, you know what the interim authorities are asking for in Venezuela? They want that oil that was seized to be part of this deal. They understand that the only way they can move oil and generate revenue and not have economic collapse is if they cooperate and work with the United States, and that's what we see are going to happen. We got to go talk to the House, guys.
Challenge to Vladimir Putin. That was.
Well, that was nice of them. So they didn't even bother touching on the Bella One. Like I told you guys, like they're being very hush-hush about that ship. And now they got to go brief Congress because they just sent the freaking Department of War after a ship over by the UK that was flagged out of Russia that had a freaking nuke sub that was going over there to protect it. And nobody wants to seem to like ask any of these questions. I went over and I checked, by the way, just so that you guys are tracking. And the White House is still, I was keeping track of that as all of this was going on, is still talking about health benefits and things of that nature. So if we end up seeing this White House spokesperson end up coming back up, which I don't think we're going to get, then we'll jump back over there. And in the meantime, I'm going to answer some of these questions, and then we're going to get back into what that ship was that ended up getting sank and what was on that ship, because I think you guys need to know about it. Hold on. Who's this news speaker? Let's see if she's got anything.
Morning, everyone. Happy New Year. What a honor to be here. I think this is Caroline's first press conference back, and what a great way to start the new year, 2026. I want to thank Secretary Kennedy. Your commitment to the well-being of Americans is such a blessing to this nation. We have been working on these new dietary guidelines really since almost day.
I can't do it. Dietary crap. Nope, that ain't it, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go through some of these questions that you guys have. Matt Borges says, do you think this operation in Venezuela was a posture as well, letting other world powers know we are the dog that eats your dinner? 100%. And, the interesting thing was, I believe it was Marco Rubio that stated that we seized those 2 vessels that were carrying sanctioned oil. Well, again, the Bella One never made its way to Venezuela. It went from Iran and never reached port, at least that we can tell on Fleet Tracker. You can't see it going into Venezuela. It turned around when the U.S. went to go interdict it and then flicked its radar off and then flicked it back on. It reflagged itself as Russian and then freaking like literally painted a Russian flag on the side of the vessel. Something like that. It was out of the movie Lord of War. Paint a Russian flag on the side of the vessel and start moving it back up over towards Russia. And the U.S. ends up interdicting the damn thing, and we're going to pretend like we don't know what the hell is going on here. That's freaking absurd to me. Absolutely absurd as we continue to go through this. Fox McCloud wants everybody to know that being fat is very unpatriotic. I would tend to agree with you, but I also don't think the White House is going to be able to sit there and tell everybody, what to eat, and that it's going to somehow fix the freaking fat person epidemic that we have inside of this country. It's just not going to happen. So. All right, moving on. I want to get back to this because it absolutely matters. And we were talking about the lost Russian ship that was carrying nuclear submarine reactor parts. And that's not coming from like OSIN analysis or anybody else. That's coming from Spanish authorities. Incock Verde says, thank you for your live editing. You're welcome. You are welcome, sir. I'm doing my absolute best. Appreciate it. So let's go down here and let's bring this up because this is absolutely important. I think you guys need to realize what's going on here. So this again came from December of 2024. And if I open up our good friend Google Maps again, google.com, and pull up Google Maps, and we go and we hit the Strait of Gibraltar, blah, blah, blah. If I could actually pronounce that correctly, the Strait. Oh, come on, work. There we go. And we go and we start hitting up the Strait of Gibraltar. So for those of you guys who are unaware, all right, we had this ship that we're currently talking about from 2024 that was traveling eastbound, going through the Strait of Gibraltar, right down over here, when it ended up sending out a freaking SOS signal. This ship was allegedly one of the Shadow Fleet members, and it was known as the Syria Express, running to a Russian base in Tardos. Now, here's the interesting part. Let's go back over the maps. So Russia has since vacated the area, to the best of my knowledge, right? But Tardos, when we go and you look at Syria, sits right up over here. There's Cyprus, which is where a lot of the supplies and stuff like that going into Israel were at. But Tardos is right here. And there was a Russian military base there, and they were on the side of the Assad regime, right? But the interesting portion about this is that Russia has been implicated with Hezbollah, specifically Russian Spetsnaz. They're in photos working side by side with them. Hezbollah and the old president of Syria, Bashar Assad, worked together along with Russia. And by the way, the IRGC. So now we're talking December of 24, right? Russia's still up over here, and you've got a ship that's allegedly en route towards that Russian base. They end up on December 21st putting out the ping, right, of the vessel. It ends up making some weird course changes and things of that nature, and then it puts out a Mayday signal, and the authorities end up, going over there to help the freaking crew. The Spanish authorities fly out to the freaking strait, up, out over here. Again, it's on its way up over to Syria, and it's going, here's Spain right up here. And so it's somewhere in this general vicinity right down here where it says Gibraltar, right? Spanish authorities end up going down there to where that vessel is located. 2 of the crew members are missing, and there's a massive hole in the side of the vessel with the metal curved inward on the side of the vessel. So the metal's curved inward, so it certainly appears as if a torpedo or an explosion outside of the ship actually struck the sucker. 2 crew members are missing. Massive hole in the side of the vessel. It's taking on water. Engine compartment is sealed up tight. That's what the Spanish authorities arrived on. They go over and they start talking to the people on the ship about what the ship was carrying. And they said 2 icebreaker components were shipped as cargo and were visible to spotted planes during the ship's earliest transit. I want to say you guys can see the ship right here. And if I zoom in on it, so it's nice and big for you, over here on the back of the ship, right underneath that play button, you guys see those? They're trying to say that those were like, crane parts or some crap that were on the back of the ship as it was cruising through the strait. They then come out and change the story on what it was, turn it into icebreaker components. Originally, it was like things for cranes. So they changed the story about what this sucker is. And then the Spanish authorities estimate the weight to be about 65 tons each, suggesting unusual density. La Verdad reports that after the master was pressed on the matter, he asked for time to think, then told investigators that the items were manhole covers. So 3 times this guy ends up changing what the hell it was. 3 times. Ends up changing what the hell it was. From like crane stuff over to icebreaker components to then he says it's manhole covers, massive hole blown in the freaking side of the ship, and all of that. Documents seen by La Verdad show that Spanish investigators identified the cargo as a pair of castings for nuclear submarine reactors, specifically for a pair of Soviet-era VM-4 SG reactors. This model was the final iteration of the VM series. Basically, they powered Russia's nuclear ballistic missile subfleet throughout the Cold War. So why is Russia shipping these things over? That's what Spanish authorities or Spanish investigators claimed was on the ship. So they were busted doing that crap. Unfortunately, all the components are now sank to the bottom of the ocean. We're not going to see them, but they're down there. I see some of you guys are asking me for a link to it, so let me grab that link and put it up on the screen for you guys. I think the easiest way for me to do this, instead of digging through it, and I'll just put it up in the chat for you guys. Give me 1 sec as I grab that and move it over, because I got to move it from computer to computer for how I talk to you guys, just because of how everything's set up over here. But there you go. If you guys want to read on it, there's your link. Feel free. Go over, have a read on it. Just dropped it over in the chat for you guys. So yeah, Russia moving freaking nuclear components over into Syria on a shadow tanker. And we just have today U.S. Special Forces going in and intercepting the Bella 1. Again, that was about a year ago that ended up taking place, a little over a year, less than 13 months ago. That went down over in the Strait of Gibraltar as they're shipping freaking components into Syria. That's an issue. And we just heard Marco Rubio say that we were interdicting oil. Well, the Bella 1 allegedly was empty. It never made its way into Venezuela. It's possible that they could have had some Iranian oil on there that they were washing down with Venezuelan oil and shipping it over, but I doubt it. I doubt it. Doesn't seem that way to me. So what the hell did we send SOCOM after is the real question. And then as we have this uprising over inside of Iran, I want you guys to take a look at this. These are diplomatic flights leaving out of Israel and heading back to Moscow. This plane that's up on your screen within the last 24 hours has made 2 separate flights. It's being alleged right now that Russian authorities are basically
I just want to let you guys know I'm fine. I'm fine. Nothing happened to me. He really needs help. He really needs help. A lot. But yeah. He called 911. Said I was doing something to myself. The cops come screaming at him, threatening to arrest him if he continues to do this. For false reporting. Yeah. EMTs came, took my blood pressure. It was high again. Like, he really needs help. He's seeing things, I think, and hearing things. Surprising. He tried to get me in trouble again. With this essay thing again. The cops keep telling him to stop that. That's not essay. You don't know what essay is. But yeah. No, he called the 911 saying I was hurting myself. With the scissors. I just want to go to sleep. I just want to go to bed. Yeah. I guess others call 911 on that. And it's like, dude, no, he called 911. And then posted that. Are you Buddha? Am I Buddha? I am pretty enlightened. I haven't seen Nirvana yet. Worked on it when I was like 19. I'm fine. He's an idiot. He's now threatening to sue Blakely PD because they're not listening to him. Because they're threatening to arrest him if he continues with this shit. He made a video when the police were there. Really? He was saying he wasn't streaming to the police. Oh my God.
Some digging, it turns out that these Somali-run daycares and various social services, turns out that the governors in several states were complicit in allowing these Somali-led social services and child care and et cetera, to literally bilk the American people out of millions and millions of dollars. So what does that portend for these governors? I kept telling the Trump administration these governors are crookeder than a dog's hind leg. And now we're seeing just how bad it really was now, aren't we? Because they've literally been allowing these Somali-led organizations to bilk the American people out of millions of dollars. Now, what can I say? I mean, I was right. You know, I could technically call this, and I was right, but I'm not going to. But yeah, I mean, that's insanity. Millions and millions of dollars. Your dollars, your money. Your money, folks. Your money. That these Somali terrorists and scavengers, scabs. We used to call them scabs back in my day, because they would go in and do jobs that that the strikers were trying to get better versions of. And so as soon as somebody went on strike, these scabs would go in and take all their jobs for a lot less money. Pissed off a lot of people doing that shit. Anyways, I'm upset of that. But yeah, so turns out these Somali-run child care, daycare, social services, man, just millions and millions of dollars, folks. Not even kidding. And I guess the Trump administration is pretty livid. So, but I mean, I've told them on Truth Social that, hey man, these governors are crooked. You need to investigate these people. I mean, look what the governors did for BLM and Antifa. I mean, they practically gave them a red carpet. And BLM and Antifa are terrorist organizations. And the governors of various states literally let them do whatever the hell they want. And as a result, what happened, class? Oh yeah, Portland, Seattle, all kinds of cities across America were left burning, weren't they? Over a goddamn criminal named George Floyd, of all things. Never forget, folks, Floyd was a convicted criminal. He pointed a loaded gun at a pregnant woman and threatened to kill her with it. He was trafficking in drugs, possibly even trafficking in guns as well. And some people speculate that he was high on drugs at the time he was apprehended even. And we're going to celebrate this man? We're going to defend this man? No, he's a criminal. He's a criminal. And so we've got cities all across the United States burning because of a damn criminal. A damn criminal that should have been locked up a long time ago anyway, apparently. Because apparently he had a rap sheet longer than my damn arm. What the hell, man? Well, of course, this is always hindsight. Hindsight's always 20/20, but still, I mean, it's pretty obvious, that Floyd was not a good guy. That should have been obvious. But yeah, this you got governors out there that will literally defend convicted criminals and terrorists, and they need to be sought out, and they need to be brought to justice, just like anybody else needs to be brought. Just because they're governors doesn't give them a free pass. You should not get a get out of jail free card just because you're a governor. That's ridiculous. So, but anyways, yeah, we're talking millions and millions and millions of taxpayer dollars funneled into these Somali terrorist organizations through daycares, Social Security, social services, adult care, etc. Crazy. Insanity, really. So much for these governors defending the rule of law, right? I mean, ain't they supposed to be defending the rule of law as a governor? Hello, anybody on? Yeah, the governor should be the very person that is defending the rule of law in his particular state. Well, they weren't doing that. Now, were they? No. They were siding with these Somali terrorists. And, these various front organizations they had going on and shit. Wow, craziness. Absolute insanity. And so the Trump administration is livid over it, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them one bit. Talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Holy shit, right? Yeah, craziness. Absolute craziness. Anyway, I just thought I'd share because I can, and because I should, and because you have a right to know. So don't forget to like, share, rate, subscribe, donate, click the bell, and always remember that your donation and gift of love keeps me going through these trying times. Peace out. Karl Jansky, in 1930, built the first radio telescope. And with it, he pointed it at a galaxy called Cassiopeia. And the reason he did that is because, according to ancient writings, Zeus lived on a floating island, they called it, in the constellation of Cassiopeia. So Jung decided to be curious and pointed his radio telescope at Cassiopeia in an effort to maybe contact Zeus himself. Well, interestingly enough, he got back a signal, an intelligent signal, crystal clear, highly advanced, highly intelligent. The problem is that he could not decipher the communication, unfortunately. So, well, you say, well, Vaughn, that's pretty cool. What happened? Well, here's what happened. Well, two things happened. First of all, he ended up getting the Nobel Prize for radio telescope. The second thing that happened is that the men in black came into his building and literally snatched everything, including the ink pens. They even took the damn ink pens. So what's up with that? What did he get a hold of? I mean, did he really get a hold of Zeus? Did he really get a hold of the Greek and Roman gods? Because the Greek and Roman gods are the same damn thing. They just go by different names, but they're the same damn thing. If you take the time to look. So it's like, did he really get a hold of Zeus? Makes you wonder. And it's equally wondering why all those men in black, and that said an army of them descended on his building and literally cleaned it out down to the damn ink pens. Why? Well, obviously he got a hold of something he shouldn't have got a hold of, right? Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate he wasn't able to decipher what the message said, because wouldn't that be interesting? But this is something that came across my desk, and it is absolutely fascinating to me. I'm gonna do even more research on this, because apparently there's ancient writings that tell us that Zeus actually lived on a floating city in Cassiopeia system. This is why he pointed his radio telescope at Cassiopeia. And he got back a signal. He got back an answer. An intelligent answer. Highly descriptive. Problem is he couldn't understand it. Couldn't make heads or tails out of it. So this came across my desk and I thought I'd share because it's quite fascinating. Especially the army of men in black that descended on his building and cleaned him out. And by cleaned out, I mean down to the ink pen. They took his ink pens. So what was that all about, Alfie? He obviously got a hold of something that I guess he shouldn't have got a hold of. I don't know. Seems very interesting, though, doesn't it? But he sure as hell got a hold of something. So I thought I'd share, since I have the opportunity to do so. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. Radio telescope. And then supposedly somebody repeated his experiment, if you will, and they got the same thing, an intelligent reply that they could not decipher. Now, I'm not sure if the second dude got his office raided by Men in Black, but we know the original guy did. So it's very fascinating, though, that we did get back a signal, because everybody's talking about the wow signal, Well, the wow signal ain't got shit on this. I mean, he got back an intelligent answer. He just couldn't decipher it, was all. This blows the wow signal right out the fucking window, So, because everybody talks about the wow signal and how great it is. Well, supposedly the inventor of the radio telescope got a much more in-depth, much more intelligent, if you will, we'll use that term, answer. And so it's like, well, what the hell is this all about? Well, apparently only the Men in Black know, because they come in and they cleaned out everything he had, man. Crazy. And then, like I said, somebody came along later, years later, and did the same damn thing, and they got an intelligent response. I don't know if they got rated, though. But fascinating story. I'm going to do more research on it. Because, what's up with that, Alfie? That's pretty crazy, huh? Anyways, I thought I'd share. Don't forget to like, subscribe, donate, pontificate, hit the bell, all that good shit. Especially donating, though, because it's your donations and gifts of love that keep me going through these trying times. Y'all have a wonderful day and better tomorrow. Bye.
The trolls that come in here. Yeah. Oh, I know. I gotta figure out how to get down to the Social Security office. Wait, I'm gonna call medical transportation. Maybe they could help me with that. Oh, it's about my disability claim, Pepper. I don't want to go into it. Nah, I can't, Kristen. I really didn't like how he had people on his live on the phone just to call you names. That was such BS and childish as fuck. I know. That type of talking doesn't even bother me. It's just like you could hear how empty and just miserable they are by how they speak. Hi, Levi. He just ended his live? Yeah. He just needs to stop his bullshit and he'd be fine. Yeah. I'm tired. Like, every time I try to fall asleep, I hear Wookie or one of them screaming about me, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm literally trying to sleep. Am I okay? Yeah, I'm okay. But yeah, he's so fucking scared. He needs to get the fuck out with all that BS. He's trying to get you going and get a reaction out of you. Try to use it again, period. Yeah. You don't think he's gonna stop? Oh my god. Yeah, it was better today until the
Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 7th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 824 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Chanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. We continue to track the news out of South America, and yes, the drama is really quite something to behold. But no surprise, I'm looking eastward. I'm watching how all of this is playing out in the Middle East. One thing that has really not received enough attention is the way in which the collapse of the Maduro regime is impacting Iran. The regime was already reeling from the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria, and now they've just lost another ally in Venezuela. For you math-challenged political science types trying to keep up at home, that's two regimes that Iran once counted on for trade, defense, and diplomacy, and they're both gone or maybe just on life support. It must be lonely these days for the Islamic Republic. More on that in about as much time as it takes to bust down the doors of the presidential palace in Caracas. Today's guest is Karine Hajar. She's an opinion journalist at the Washington Post, and she's now a repeat offender on this program. She last joined us back when she was still at the Boston Globe. Now she's just about a swamp creature. Haha. We'll talk about that, I guess, soon as well. Oh, and she's a former FDD media fellow. Karine, who's of Lebanese descent, closely tracks developments in Lebanon. But recently, she's been digging into Venezuela and what the fallout from Maduro's capture could mean for U.S. policy on Iran and beyond. Stay tuned for that conversation coming up in just a few. The Iran protests continue, including a sit-in at the Grand Bazaar in Tehran. And I got to say, I'm a little giddy. I'm not saying I'm happy that Iran has been run into the ground by a bunch of kleptocratic clerics. I'm not saying I like the reported 35 deaths or the 1,200 arrests resulting from the regime crackdown. And I'm definitely not saying I celebrate the lack of water or electricity or economic opportunity. That's all really depressing. But I am pleased that the people of Iran are once again standing up to their oppressors. And I'm thrilled the United States is voicing its support for once. Yes, that was a swipe at former U.S. President Barack Obama, who failed to back the Iranian people back in 2009. We could have done the right thing more than 15 years ago when Iranians came out in droves to protest the regime's rigged elections. Fast forward to the current protests. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is signaling that the regime is losing control. He said during a televised speech that the government can't be expected to quell the unrest alone. To that I say, hell yes. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei may be planning to flee to Russia if his security loses control. Do svidaniya. Pezeshkian has called on security forces not to shoot the protesters, and Iran's military chief is now threatening both America and Israel. It's all chaotic, but one thing is clear. We'll keep cheering on the brave Iranians who are showing the world how to fight for one's freedom. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, 5 years after the Abraham Accords, Israel and Morocco are still going strong. Earlier this week, the two countries wrapped up the third Israel-Morocco Joint Military Committee meeting in Tel Aviv. The convening included visits to IDF units, defense industry, and other security organizations. And it culminated with the signing of a joint action plan for 2026. Officials involved in the meeting said discussions focused on strategic planning, technological innovation, operational readiness, and joint training. The main event was a strategic forum. The focus there was long-term capacity building and coordination. The upshot is that Morocco isn't just an Abraham Accords signatory in name. It's becoming one of Israel's most important Arab allies and partners. The country took a lot of heat during these past 2 years, but it also didn't waver. The Israelis appreciate that, even if you don't hear it often enough in the media. Israeli officials said the meeting this week was, quote, another milestone in deepening a partnership central to regional stability. That's a quote. You got to take your good news from the Middle East anywhere you can get it, folks. I'll take more whenever you got it. Headline 2, over in Paris, Syria and Israel resumed security talks, and it looks like they might have actually made a breakthrough. Discussions began on Monday with White House envoy Tom Barrack serving as mediator. In the run-up to the Paris talks, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appointed a new negotiating team led by Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, acting National Security Advisor Gil Reich, and incoming Mossad chief Roman Goffman also reportedly participated. Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani from Syria was running point for Damascus alongside Syrian intelligence chief Hussein al-Salama. The end goal is a security agreement between Israel and Syria to resolve the tensions that have been simmering at the border and in southern Syria since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December of 2024. And as of last night, it looks like they reached some kind of a deal. I'm not sure I love what I've seen about the deal so far. But then again, I'm not sure I love the regime in Syria. But we'll be watching closely as new details emerge, and we'll report back with developments. Headline 3, Gideon Sar has landed in Somaliland. Down in Africa, Israel's foreign minister touched down in Somaliland for the first official visit since Israel recognized this territory as a government on December 26th. This wasn't just a first official Israeli visit to Somaliland. It's the first time any foreign minister has visited Somaliland in more than 3 decades. So in other words, the first time since Bill Clinton was elected president, and the cost of a newspaper was 25 cents. Sar landed in Somaliland yesterday. He was greeted at the airport by a group of senior officials before meeting with Somaliland's president, foreign minister, presidential affairs minister, and chief of staff. This was an historic visit that does more than just recognize a territory that should, by all accounts, become the 194th state at the UN. If Israel plays its cards right, Somaliland could take in Gaza refugees, and the country could potentially provide an airbase for Israel to tackle that Houthi threat in Yemen. That's some serious proximity right there. And maybe also disrupt some of Turkey's aggressive military action in the Horn of Africa that is increasingly a strategic region for a bunch of bad actors. So some serious strategery all around on the part of Israel, folks. I'm eager to see how it all plays out. Oh, and quick headline 4, and I'm just waking up to this one. The Attorney General of Texas has filed a legal brief against American Muslims for Palestine, AMP. For those who need a quick refresher, this is the group that spawned Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, that group of student thugs that have been protesting and rioting on college campuses for the last 2 years. AMP has a checkered past, to put it mildly. So stay tuned for more. For now, I'm just going to say, don't mess with Texas. All right, it's time to bring on Karine Hajar of the Washington Post. Without further ado, let's welcome her back onto the program. Welcome to the FTD Morning Brief, Karine Hajar.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, tell us real quick about this new move you're making. You're going to be a swamp creature. I get to make fun of it.
I am. I knew this would be my fate one day, but I'm finally making the move down to DC. And yeah, just thrilled to be at the Post, part of the editorial board's mission to promote free markets and personal liberties. And we've been focusing a lot on the Middle East. We've been focusing a lot on Venezuela lately. So it's just been a fun onboarding process, really exciting onboarding process.
Well, I'm excited for you. I know it's been a long road. I've been watching your career. It makes me really happy to see this. Let's get to some of the news. I mean, look, you've been watching the Maduro affair, this episode, this incident, whatever we're calling it. It's not regime change yet, but it might be. What does this mean for Hezbollah, specifically in Latin America, where they have a significant base?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And this sort of ties into the big question mark of this entire debacle that's going on right now in Venezuela, which is just what happens next and who takes power. I think something important to remember is that the guys with the guns, meaning Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino, they're still in Venezuela. They are the ones who sort of are in charge of all the people with guns, also the repressive apparatus that exists in Venezuela, the armed colectivos, motorcycle gangs that go around terrorizing people. And they have a lot of power with, obviously the military, the police and all of that. But it's going to be hard to see any systemic change in Venezuela, to the corruption, to the cooperation with adversaries, not just Hezbollah, but their patrons, Iran, China, Russia, the Cubans, until we know exactly what's going to happen with all of the bad guys that remain in power in Venezuela. And so I'll be watching anxiously to see how the president deals with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who I guess is now technically the president. Illegitimate, I will mention. Maduro lost his election, held on to power. So the same goes for his vice president, obviously. But, she's a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. Her dad was a Marxist guerrilla member and leader. So these are going to be, it's going to be a tricky moving forward. But you mentioned earlier that my family, I have Lebanese heritage, but my mom's side of the family is part of the was part of the Lebanese diaspora in Venezuela. So we've been watching very anxiously over the past 2 decades. And as more cooperation has gone on with Iran and obviously Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, but especially Hezbollah wreaking havoc in Lebanon and also in Venezuela. So this was just a big day of Maduro's fall was a day of justice. Obviously what happens next is tricky.
Yeah. And when we look at Venezuela, it's been a transit point for a lot of the illicit activity that Hezbollah is involved in the tri-border area, right? And that sort of deep, lawless jungle area where they've been counterfeiting goods and they've been moving drugs and moving weapons. And it's been a huge source of funding for Hezbollah. And that obviously is going to be potentially a gut punch to the party of God, as they call themselves.
Right.
But so now let's just talk briefly. I mean, you mentioned Iran and what this might mean for them. I mean, this was a state partner. I mean, I was mentioning at the top of the program that, the Iranians lost Assad in Syria. Now looks like they've lost Maduro in Venezuela. So that's 2 allies down in like the course of 13 months. How do you see this playing out for Iran? Did they really need Venezuela for something crucial, or was this just a partnership of convenience?
It's hard to say. I mean, this is all a part of their bigger strategy to undermine the West. I mean, they're pretty transparent about it, right? And no better way to do that than be right in America's backyard, helping with weapons, drones with the Venezuelans, trading oil. And they both, we know in 2022, there was the pact between the Iranians and the Venezuelans that they were collaborating to sort of skirt U.S. sanctions and water down their power. I was really glad to see, even before Maduro's extraction, that President Trump started going after Venezuelan oil tankers. And I hope that they keep that up. That is, they have been flaunting our sanctions consistently for years. But we should also take the same approach with Iran. There's plenty of illegal tankers making their way around the world, trying to get around U.S. policy. And I think that trying to target those would be really helpful, especially now as Iranians are bravely taking to the streets and demanding better from their regime. And it's going to be interesting. I think like if you're an Iranian protester right now and you're struggling to put food on the table and the government is saying, let us give you $7 a month to help tide you over, which is what they're offering. It's hard to imagine that two of your leaders' big allies, both in Venezuela and in Syria, as you mentioned, those partnerships have fallen away. In the meantime, while people are starving and trying to find water, thanks to, again, Iranian government mismanagement, you're trying to funnel $1 billion over the last year to Hezbollah and Lebanon. You got to be asking yourself, what is this all for? What is the point of this axis of resistance if I can't eat or put food on the table for my own family?
Yeah. And I think that's the message. And I think that's why more pressure is going to be needed. And I think tankers, that's a great way of doing it. More support for the people. I'd like to see some money being put into the pockets of the protesters. We'll have to think about exactly how that happens. But man, would it be great to give them a strike fund right now to allow them to continue to put food on the table while they continue to go out into the streets and while the regime is still reeling. But I want to ask you kind of maybe a wider Middle East question, or a wider question about all of these bad actors that America has been locking horns with. I mean, it's got to be pretty jarring right now. I mean, we haven't seen really a regime change per se. I mean, the regime technically is still in place, but the leader of the Venezuelan regime is gone, right? He's facing justice now in New York. The Middle East has some trauma from this, right? I mean, they remember when the United States was in the regime change game. This was back during the Bush administration, right? We toppled the Iraqi government, the Afghanistan government. What do you think the Middle East is thinking right now as they're looking out? And by the way, also some of these other bad actors in Latin America, it's got to be kind of a moment where everybody's thinking, is Trump going to come for us? Is that kind of your read?
I think that big picture, just zooming out all the way to the highest level, this was an important move to reestablish the credibility of the U.S. deterrent, because you had, over the Obama administration, over the Biden administration especially, we kept letting our red lines be trampled over and over again. And especially when it came to Iran, we gave them easy deals. Under Biden, particularly, we were going to give them basically a glide path to a nuclear weapon with very few downsides. The only downsides for us, luckily, that deal never came to fruition. But I think that they were learning that they could do whatever they want. In the meantime, they're funneling billions to Hezbollah, Hamas, and sort of laying the groundwork for a lot of the crises that we've been seeing play out in the Middle East. So President Trump gave Maduro a 1-week deadline. I believe it was sometime in November. And he gave Maduro amazing deals over and over again. Go to your estate in Moscow, go live in luxury in Minsk, go join your comrades somewhere else. Instead, he chose to stick around, and that was crossing the US red line. On top of that, these are just, the Venezuelans were working with bad actors. They are a security concern in our hemisphere and in our backyard. So I think that following through on those red lines and making sure that Maduro sees justice was incredibly important. Now, that doesn't mean that the path ahead is necessarily going to be smooth or clear. And I think that's where you get a lot of fair questions about regime change. And you're certainly hearing this from a lot of the protesters I've come across. But something I've been thinking a lot about is regime change in places in the Middle East is a bit different. Again, the US government has not committed to straight up regime change right now in Venezuela. It's still unclear exactly what we're going to be doing, but people have to remember that the Venezuelan population is a bit different from some of these similar operations we've seen in the Middle East. They remember prosperity. They remember general democracy. I visited Venezuela a few times over my life when I was younger. We had to stop going, but as it was declining throughout the Chavez era, but people are still alive that remember before, and also remember when their vote counted. So I think that makes this a little different, and we shouldn't totally lose hope yet.
Yeah, I do think it's important not to conflate the Middle East with what's happening in our own hemisphere. And actually that brings me to some of the protests that you've been watching. And I want to hear about what you've been seeing. The protests here in the US, where people have been I guess, pro and against this move by Trump. I understand the controversy surrounding it. I understand the kind of, the similarities that people are trying to draw, when they think about regime change. You hear some of the isolationists out there saying the U.S. should not do any of this. Others that are saying that it's about time. So what are the themes that you're picking up as you hear these protests?
The general theme I've seen, well, I'll start with the one in Times Square, which was the day after Maduro was extracted. And, I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen and listeners have seen the videos of jubilance and joy coming out of the Venezuelan diaspora around the world. And that really has been the Venezuelan response. But in Times Square, a bunch of socialists gathered to talk about how I heard people saying that we should free Maduro, that Maduro and Chavez were exemplary leaders and they were fighting for justice, and that the only struggle that they had and the only reason that the Venezuelan people were struggling was because of U.S. sanctions. Of course, that's foolish, and U.S. sanctions were in response to those bad actors. But this is just like a reflexive, it's a reflexive instinct to side with whoever says they are the resistance. It's really, that's why you can see it in both the context of the Middle East and being pro-Hamas, also seeing it in this context being pro-Maduro. Maduro simply, in these people's mind, is part of the resistance against the West and also the U.S. I mean, I was hearing chants, against U.S. imperialism, etc. The few Venezuelans that walked by that protest just happened to be in the area. We're chanting USA, we're praising the U.S. government, and we're thrilled that Maduro had fallen. I mean, they're very clear-eyed about the challenges that are coming ahead. They don't think that this is necessarily automatically going to go well, but they see this as justice served for a criminal and somebody who has terrorized their population for years. And then I was also at the arraignment outside of the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. And there you did have an organized Venezuelan demonstration. And really, I should say it was a celebration. People were dancing, singing, and Venezuelan culture is very joyful. They just haven't really had a chance to be joyful in a really long time. So it was beautiful to be there and see it. And then on the other side, they were sort of separated because it was getting a little heated. You had, again, the same anti-American crowd. Socialists literally telling me next to Venezuelans that these Venezuelans don't know what's good for them. They need Maduro leadership. And that's quite sad to see. And I think overall points to a big failure in the education of a lot of young people, because it was a lot of young people out there praising Chavez and Maduro.
Well, and that's a theme, right? I'm sure these same people have been, praising Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah since the war began in the Middle East on October 7th of 2023. I mean, I got to say, look, I'm a big fan of free speech. I'll defend everyone's free speech to the end. I've been sued on grounds of free speech. But I got to tell you, when you look at what's going on right now, the people that are unhappy about what Trump just did, right? We're talking about, the regime in Venezuela, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Cubans, right? And then the people that are happy about this are the Venezuelans. And right. I mean, the people of the region. So I got to say, I mean, let people protest all they want, but I think you can pretty much see how things are shaking out right now. This is a net positive. Doesn't mean that it's going to work out perfectly in the end with, whatever comes after Maduro. But I got to say, if you judge this based on how our enemies are reacting, I feel pretty good about it.
Absolutely.
Okay, I got one more question for you, Kareem, before I let you go. I know you follow Lebanon closely. This has been a pretty crucial time for Lebanon, right? I mean, Hezbollah has been weakened since 2024, since that Grim Reaper operation and the liquidation of Hassan Nasrallah. And since then, the terror group has been on the rocks. It's been on the ropes. It's probably cut down to 25% of its strength, but it's not leaving, right? And the government has been it's been tasked by the United States to remove Hezbollah. The Israelis want this too. I mean, it's kind of ironic. The Israelis are probably the biggest proponents of Lebanese sovereignty, other than the Lebanese people right now. And yet we don't seem to be moving in the right direction. So what's happening here? What's your assessment of what's happening in Lebanon?
Yeah, we had an editorial out recently that talked about the unfinished business in the Middle East, and Lebanon is one of them, one of the issues that is definitely unfinished. And you had the Lebanese government officials promise to have disarmament of south of the Litani River, closest bordering with Israel, that whole area disarmed by the end of the year. Recently, I believe it was the foreign minister who said those operations were supposed to end by the end of the year, but they're ongoing. So we know that that process is probably not done because Israel continues to strike at what they tell us are Hezbollah targets in the south. I think most recently there was a huge strike in the southern city of Sidon. So these are signs that disarmament isn't done yet. The Lebanese are not moving quickly enough. But I always like to zoom out and remind folks that they are operating in an incredibly delicate environment as well. Hezbollah still has, we've talked, you've seen a lot of folks in the media sort of celebrating Hezbollah's demise. And it's true, they have been weakened, and that's a huge victory for both Israel and the US. But they still exist. And more importantly, they have strong political support from the Shiite community in Lebanon. They provide a lot of humanitarian aid, a lot of these types of social services, and that maintains their support. So politically, that's a challenge for the Lebanese government. Also, coming up in May are parliamentary elections. And so this is going to be another issue for the Lebanese government as they move ahead, thinking about disarmament heading into those huge elections. And lastly, and this is the most important, and it's more of a sort of psychological, deep-rooted fear of civil war. The Lebanese government want to move extremely carefully, and in this case, they're moving too slowly and too carefully because they don't want to spark a sort of internal conflict. So we saw this play out in the south. The Israelis and the Americans have been urging more aggressive disarmament, and that sometimes means going into private homes and raiding private homes. There was a point where the Lebanese army said, "We're not going to do that." It was just too visceral of an sort of attack, and they've been staying on the outskirts, and that's why you've been seeing the Israelis striking at different facilities, homes, buildings, continue to strike in the south. The big question mark is moving forward in the north. I want to see them disarm the south first. I want to see that they can do that. Moving into the north is going to be even trickier. If Israel has to step in, they still are striking outside of the south. I think on Monday they were striking in the east of the country. That's going to be a political issue for a lot of Lebanese, including Lebanese who are against Hezbollah but are just tired of war. So I'm hopeful because the Lebanese government continues to say we have to disarm Hezbollah. On Thursday, they're having conversations in the government, and they'll get an update from the Lebanese armed forces about where that's headed, and I'll be watching anxiously. But the political challenges will be great moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I fear that they overlearned the lessons of the 1980s, and that right now,
Yes.
the big lesson is, don't let another country occupy you like Iran. And again, they've got the Israelis on their side. They've got the Americans on their side. We'll keep watching. I want to thank you, Karina Jar, for joining us today. Good luck at the new gig, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks.
All right. Good to see her moving onward and upward. Here's what FTD has on tap for you today. My colleague Behnan Bentalabu has an amazing new piece in the Free Press on Iran's ongoing protests and how they differ from past uprisings in the aftermath of the 12-day war. It is clear to Iranians that the regime is banged up and that the Ayatollah's power is waning. So the people are seizing the moment. A full-scale revolution may be on the horizon, folks. Inshallah is all I can say. Meanwhile, on the latest episode of FTD's Foreign Policy, host Cliff May, our supreme leader, is joined by Bashir Goth, Somaliland's representative to the United States, to discuss Israel's recognition of the republic's sovereignty. Could this anti-Islamist, pro-peace Muslim government be next to join the Abraham Accords? I don't know if it matters so much, but I will say, learn about this country, or this almost country. It's a fascinating discussion. Highly recommend it. Foreign Policy. Finally, if you haven't heard enough from me today, I wrote a piece for the New York Post on Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro's capture by the United States while taking down the head of a narco state responsible for widespread drug trafficking and American deaths was obviously a key goal. The operation also sends a broader message. The U.S. is reasserting its influence in the Western Hemisphere and signaling to our foes, which just happens to be Maduro's friends, that we're not to be messed with. Here's looking at you. Cuba, Russia, China, and all the other thugs out there. All right, time to stick a fork in it, folks, because we're done. If you're looking for some smart things to read, check out the expert analysis on our website, FDD.org. Catch our quick takes across our socials, and please consider kicking off 2026 with a generous tax-deductible donation. You can do that, as always, at FDD.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another edifying episode of your favorite morning show. Until then, have a happy Wednesday. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off.
I like Jonathan Schanzer. I like FDD. That whole there's a few channels that I'm going to be featuring, hopefully daily. So welcome to my very first members only live stream. Number one, my very first members only. Okay, we're going to switch for a moment from World Watch to where are we going to go? We're going to go from there to Shanny Watch. Now, Shanny Watch, this is the situation with Shanny. Her phone or her stream has gone into this. People in the live chat are, hope she's okay. This is scary. Yeah, so nobody knows what's going on with Shanny as far as the drunk is concerned. He has got absolutely nothing new. 2 days ago in videos, and live is 6 hours ago. We can watch a little bit of it before we carry on. Oh my God, look at that. I fucking need
Mr. Larson fan.
What the hell's he doing?
Gotta be on the beach here and just have fun,
Fucking nutcase.
I had a hella stressful fucking day. And I can't sleep. And I'm hoping that my guest will come on with me and hang out.
Oh, he's got guests coming on, really?
We'll see.
I'm just gonna scroll through this and see what he does. He's just gonna be girly, try and be a little femboy.
Hey, crazy Maisie.
I'm just gonna go like always go to the end, Let's give him, how much is it? Let's give him a couple of minutes. See what happens. Or is that what happens? Hold on.
What the fuck? What is going on here? Gavin, no. What? Mom doesn't feed you. Listen, I have to feed the cat. I have to feed the cat because this piece of shit bitch doesn't feed him. Let's go, Gav.
Is that his Jif peanut butter and crackers or something that he's got to eat? Well, I think this is kind of where this is a recording, and I think Jason sort of goes frozen, just like Shanny's just gone, even though it does end. So he will come back, and then he goes frozen. Let's watch it.
Poor little Gavin. He's so hungry, He's like, Daddy, I need some food. Risky. Did you get me the link? Oh.
Oh?
Dank Dumpster. That's a cool channel name. Everybody.
There he goes. And he stays like that until that's it. Okay, so this is where Rev is at. Was at. Rev. I take that back. This is where Jason is at. As far as our lady Shanny, she's still stuck in wherever. Where is she gone? Yeah, so she's got a couple of people waiting. So while neither of them are actually functional right now, let's move over to Silicon Wafers. Silicon Wafers is a commentator whose view I actually appreciate.
Has entered 2026 the way it entered 2025 and 2024 and 2023, with a president selling war as destiny and a country being trained to endure and suffer economically, socially, morally. And now we have a stark contrast in messaging from the imprisoned terrorist Igor Girkin Strelkov. On the one side, Vladimir Putin in his New Year address wrapping the invasion in family metaphors, sovereignty slogans, and certainty of victory. This was echoed in the Christmas church service he attended with soldiers and their families. On the other side, we have Igor Strelkov Girkin, one of the war's most notorious early architects, now jailed by the regime that he once served, circulating a bleak forecast from prison that reads less like a pep talk and more like a countdown to systemic failure. Put them together and you get a clearer picture of the Kremlin's trap. Putin can't end the war without admitting the whole project has failed. He can't win it cleanly, and he can't stop feeding Russia into the furnace without the state degrading or folding like a pack of cards. Before we head further into the story, thank to everyone who supported us through the last year. Your assistance was massively appreciated. And of course, we are scaling up in 2026. More events, more filming on the ground, more interviews, more events. And if any of the audience are minded to contribute to help make this happen, then please do check out the Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links in the description of the video. Putin's New Year address was a reaffirmation of the war as the organizing principle of Russian life. Reuters described the speech as an attempt to rally troops and frame the war as part of an existential struggle with the West. His soundbite of the press event was short, clean, designed for repetition. "We believe in you and our victory," he said. Well, this was reported on Reuters December 31st. This is classic Kremlin communication strategy. Make the war sound not just justified, but inevitable, not just costly, but sacred, and crucially, normalize this endless state of war. The Kiev Independent noted the address avoided any real discussion of peace, Ukraine, or an end state, an outcome. It is war embedded into patriotism and historical mission. Putin's job here is not to explain the war. It's to make Russians live inside it and give themselves to it without demanding answers. At Putin's end-of-year Q&A and press conference on December 19th, he again performed the reasonable statesman routine while holding the line on maximalist terms for Ukraine's surrender or conquest. He said Russia was ready to end the conflict peacefully, but only on the principles he set out earlier, and he shifted responsibility outward. The ball is entirely in the court of our Western opponents, he said. He also repeated the propaganda move of claiming Russia is the victim of Western aggression by proxy. It's not we who are fighting you, it's you who are fighting us, he said. Again, classic aggressor posture, reminiscent of the Nazis and even Stalin in the 1930s. He addressed repression, but flatly claimed, we have no repression or criminal prosecution in Russia. Well, hold the absurdity and patent falsity of that line in your minds, because in the next segment, we're going to put it beside the reality of a regime that jails even its own ultranationalists when they stop being useful or start to question the legitimacy of the Tsar demigod. Well, before we do, note the economic subtext Putin is trying to smuggle into his victory narrative. In the same Q&A, he touted GDP growth and inflation targets and presented fiscal tightening as responsible governance. He even framed a VAT rise as the honest and transparent way to deal with the challenges we face. But let's not forget, the bit that he didn't mention is that those economic challenges were entirely created by the war that he recklessly started. So Girkin from prison claims we're sliding towards defeat. Now to Igor Girkin, also known as Igor Strelkov, one of the most prominent hardline nationalist voices from the 2014 Donbass war, later a relentless critic of how Putin has fought the full-scale invasion. The main critique is that Putin is losing, of course. He is not questioning the morality of the war itself. Girkin is not a liberal dissident. He's a pro-war ultranationalist who argued the Kremlin was fighting incompetently, too slowly, too softly, too corruptly. And that's precisely why his imprisonment is politically revealing. The regime isn't only crushing anti-war opposition, it also cages pro-war voices that threaten elite cohesion. Or remember, Prigozhin. Reuters reported in 2024 that a Russian court sentenced Girkin to 4 years in a penal colony on extremism-related charges, despite his prominence on the pro-war scene. When Girkin's prison letters circulate, they serve a dual purpose. Firstly, they reflect the mood of the most bitter nationalist faction. And two, they reveal how fragile the Kremlin feels, because it had to jail one of its own ideological enforcers. Here's a figure that feeds their paranoia. And of course, paranoia is something that is never in short supply in the Kremlin with its fortress mindset. On January 4th, an English language thread by analyst Chris Owen circulated an extended set of translated excerpts from what's presented as Girkin's gloomy forecast for 2026, and it is said to be sourced from Girkin's Telegram channel. The tone is unmistakable. He argues there will be no meaningful compromise and mocks anyone expecting a tidy deal. Naturally, no compromise will be reached this year, he says. I hope this has finally sunk in on everyone on the planet of the pink ponies. Girkin's core claim is that the war is escalating. It's not heading towards closure. In the same translated excerpts, he predicts harsher sanctions, possible direct friction with a coalition of the willing, and widened confrontation involving states like Turkey and Romania, framed as Russia accumulating more enemies in this excerpt from his letter. But the strategic heart of the letter is Girkin's argument that essentially Russia is spending itself away, and time is not on Moscow's side unless the state shifts into deeper mobilization. He warns that without real mobilization, economic and political, Russia will keep sliding towards defeat in Ukraine and collapse at home. If this doesn't happen, it means the peace process, then everything will continue, the slide towards our defeat in the war. And then he goes for the throat on governance. Ineffective, degenerate elites, leaders he depicts as incompetent and corrupt. Girkin may exaggerate, posture and perform. He's always been a rhetorician of doom, but his value here is diagnostic. He is speaking from inside the pro-war ideological ecosystem and is describing a state that cannot sustainably generate victory, only continuation of war, which brings us back to Putin's line. We have no repression. Yet Gherkin is literally behind bars, and Reuters notes he has also been barred from internet use for years, an attempt to sever him from his audience. Running on fumes, why the Kremlin has no good options. Putin's New Year address exudes confidence, unity, destiny. Gherkin's prison forecast is the exact opposite, an angry backstage whisper of exhaustion, incompetence, drift towards defeat. Put them together, and the outline of Russia's strategic rut comes into focus. One, the war has become one of regime maintenance. The Kremlin is no longer merely pursuing military objectives. It's preserving the logic that justifies the regime's grip, its very existence. Ending the war without a win risks elite infighting, nationalist backlash, and an economic and public reckoning. Continuing the war bleeds capacity, but avoids that ultimate humiliation. Point two, the state is trying to make austerity feel like patriotism. Putin can talk about growth, inflation targets, and VAT rises as technocratic governance, but under sanctions and war costs, stability becomes a mere regime slogan, a piece of political doublethink. Thirdly, hardliners are being managed, not empowered. Gherkin is the proof. The Kremlin system can tolerate criticism right up until it threatens its cohesion. Then it relabels the same as extremism, according to Reuters. And we have to ask, is there any real or independent power in that nationalist community in any case? Well, it's hard to say what part of it is regime managed, what part performative, what part grifting, and what part actually cohesive. Well, four, the wider security environment remains volatile. Putin continues to frame Russia as besieged, and he uses set pieces like the New Year address to reinforce that psychological posture. Again, Reuters. Gherkin, meanwhile, predicts widening confrontation and tightening external pressure. Even if his specifics are wrong, the trajectory, escalatory pressure, and unmanaged risk is exactly what prolonged attritional wars like this generate: uncertainty and instability. We cannot know when the black swans will arrive, but the war makes their probability of arrival individually or in a bevy far more probable with each passing month. So what should we watch out for? A deeper domestic shift towards militarization, certainly. Further measures that bring more of society under wartime rules and obligations. This is taken from the Kiev Independent notes that the Kremlin's broader war normalization strategy. More unity messaging is expected, paired with quiet fiscal tightening, the state trying to buy time through narrative discipline while squeezing the population and the economy for ever more resources. Hardliner mood swings, not because Gherkin is right, but because his audience exists, and it is potentially quite substantial. And it is exactly the demographic that Putin cannot fully satisfy. They demand victory, not endurance and suffering. Putin is asking Russians to believe in victory. Gherkin is telling his followers to prepare for a future where victory is not available on the current track. That doesn't make Gherkin admirable or a hero or a Democrat. He is still a criminal, a terrorist, and an imperialistic murderer. But it does make him useful as a signal flare, a barometer of the state of regime fragility. Putin's regime is running on fumes, but will not collapse tomorrow. However, Putin has chosen war, and that means he has a narrowing corridor of options where every path forward costs more and every path back requires the one thing that this regime cannot do, will never do, and that is admit it is wrong. And yet the costs of stopping the war are still perceived to be much higher and riskier than the costs of continuing it. Many of you generously contributed to buying a truck, a 4x4 vehicle for the armed forces of Ukraine in our recent marathon fundraiser for Car for Ukraine. That vehicle was delivered thanks to your generosity and refitted in Lviv with life-saving reinforcements, the doors, windows, and the engine area. That vehicle was destroyed a few weeks after it was delivered at the front in a drone attack. All three servicemen survived, with only minor scratches and concussion. Your generosity in funding the vehicle was instrumental in saving the lives of all 3 Ukrainian soldiers. Now we are launching our Christmas Tree Trucks 2025 campaign. The goal is to raise 11,000 euros. So please help us buy another vehicle for one of the most effective Ukrainian brigades on the 4th Christmas of Ukraine's epic fight for survival against an imperialistic and genocidal neighboring state. Help us celebrate the heroism of the soldiers who have held the line against all the odds, who fight for their freedom and pay a terrible price, while also, incidentally, protecting the freedoms of Europe.
Yeah, it's kind of sad that Muslims still believe that those ugly parts of their ancient religion. You know, Christians and Jews in Europe, I thought, had experienced an enlightenment, and you can see they're not as much the, you know, but Christians in Europe, they're reverting to their primordial knuckle-dragging anti-Semitism, which has, you know, more than a millennia of history behind it. Europe, you really need to look, I'm going to say this over and over and over. Why the hell isn't Europe, which within my parents' lifetime slaughtered 11 million people, 6 million Jews, in an intentional effort to wipe out the civilian Jewish population of Europe, within people's lifetimes, Europe's ugly, bloody past with anti-Semitism has yet to be confronted.
I just want to reply to one of our most loyal anti-Semitic trolls in the chat who says, "What about the songs that Feyenoord sings about Ajax?" Yes, I'm aware. First of all, let me start with the point that Feyenoord fans are not banned from the United Kingdom. So as far as I know, you know, they can visit when they play. I don't follow European football outside of Maccabi too closely, so I don't know when they're playing and where. But let me know when the last time Feyenoord fans were banned from anywhere for singing "Gas the Jews," which they sing in every match. Now, there's a difference here. Feyenoord fans are singing pro-terrorist and pro-Nazi songs. Maccabi fans did not actually sing any such songs. The songs that people are referring to are songs about letting the IDF win and, yes, fuck up the Arabs. But in the context of this song, it's very clear what that means. And that is, by the way, a position that I fully support. If the IDF were actually allowed to win, there would be peace in the Middle East. It is essentially a pro-peace song. But yeah, comparing that to what Feyenoord sings, no, what Feyenoord sings is you know, the results of that you see in attacks like Manchester and like Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
James, anything to add before I go back to?
No, let's keep going. You're absolutely right. Ditto.
Okay, so where did I? Yeah. Okay, so the Board of Deputies of British Jews has called for the chief constable to be sacked, saying the force seemed to have made a decision to ban fans first and then, quote, search for evidence to justify it. Guildford told the Home Affairs Committee the decision, quote, wasn't influenced by politics. Okay, let me pause there again. First of all, the Board of British Jews, whatever it's called, I don't know why that body exists. It happens to have the right to make the right point here, but this is a point that we know from Guildford himself. Also, wasn't influenced by politics. I mean, does anti-Semitism fall under politics, James? Because that's what the decision was. It was Jews. It was a local MP who didn't want the game to be allowed to be played at all. And it is an area where, you know, Muslims, I don't know if they're the majority, but they're certainly the ruling class. Let's put it that way.
Well, in one sense, I have to say, yeah, with the number of explicitly anti-Semitic politicians in Western countries, yeah, it's a political issue. It's a political issue, Western countries, because you have elected officials who have the most primordial attitudes about the Jewish people. That's why Israel can't defend itself. That's why you take this position. That's why you reward, the Palestinians with recognition of a state after October 7th. Yeah, you need to really check your premises, as Ayn Rand said, all the way down. because you got it completely backwards. It's a political issue. And for me now, it's a political issue precisely because, you know, the Midlands police are looking the other way, finding evidence to, you know, to cover their ass, as we would say. And so, yeah, it's a political issue. Only the Jewish people, Israeli fans, are the victims. Good
By the
Lord.
way, the point you made reminded me of something else that happened yesterday in London. Other than this hearing, you know what that is?
No.
It was the opening of the Embassy of the State of Palestine in London. So yeah, on the day when the police answers for why they are banning Jews from their city, in one city, in the capital, basically the
A festering hotbed of terrorism now exists in the heart of London.
Yep.
Wow.
Okay,
Palestinian-
that's
Wow.
see, that's what it is. Mr. Starmer, when you recognize a Palestinian state and you allow them to have all the diplomatic immunity and privileges right there in the heart of your capital, one of the greatest cities in the world, okay, what you have done is you have opened, it's now open season because now they can be a hotbed for all kinds of terrorist activity and intelligence and support. And by the way, the political crap that led the police in Birmingham to get things completely ass backwards. Yeah. Wow. Great progress, England. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, Somalia.
Sorry, I missed the news headlines here in the States that an embassy was actually opening up in London.
Somalians
Wow.
need not worry because the British Ministry of Foreign Affairs last week made it clear that they are not going to, or a couple of weeks ago, that they're not going to recognize Somaliland because, you know, they believe in the territorial integrity of Somalia or whatever the fuck.
The territorial integrity of, okay, I won't know, sorry.
I am
That is
dropping more
insane.
F-bombs than you know, advertised.
Yeah, that is insane. Yeah, the territorial integrity of, you know, a country where Muslims are at one another's throats, you know, that is famous for its piracy, and that's the country you're going to recognize as legitimate and having territorial integrity, etc. I mean, my God.
Okay,
Talk
we
about
only have a couple of minutes left. I want to quickly go through another part of this article, or the next part, which Guilford said he stood by the accuracy of the intelligence, which was key to the city's safety advisory group, made up of people including police and council representatives, issuing the ban on away fans. A letter from Dutch police, seen by the BBC, appears to question evidence West Midlands police cited about Maccabi fans' behavior at a match in Amsterdam. The committee has said it will request further information from police in the Netherlands. Members of the safety advisory group deemed the Europa League match, quote, high risk because of unrest during previous Maccabi Tel Aviv matches. The committee also heard police thought vigilante groups from the local community in Birmingham posed a threat to Maccabi fans. So yeah, you know, as an aside, they tell you what the real reason was. The Muslims who didn't want Jews there in the first place would have attempted and probably succeeded in attacking, maybe killing Jews, because that is what they stand for. Look, there's a reason the attacks we hear of are, you know, in a synagogue in Manchester in Yom Kippur, or in an event celebrating Hanukkah in Bondi Beach. These are places where, you know, the Muslims know there are a bunch of Jews in one place at one time, and if you want to kill Jews, that's going to be relatively easy. So there's no
You
doubt.
know, Jewish families are going to be there. Jewish children are going to be there. You're aiming at civilians. Oh no, it's despicable. I mean, it's the same in you know, the United States, the Washington D.C. killings, for example. No, it's this kind of violence, systematic violence against the Jewish people as a whole. It is the problem. And, you know, if we're going to be questioning who should be playing, it should be it shouldn't be Maccabi Tel Aviv. Okay, let's question there. Because, you know, the police have just dropped the ball. Equality before the law is not a question of whether you have bigots in your population. We have a 14th Amendment in my country that says, you know, everyone has the right to equal protection. All persons have the right to equal protection under the law. And it doesn't matter if there's a majority, say in a southern state, that is just outright racist. They can't engage in racism, racist laws, racist law enforcement. And it's your job as the government to enforce protect the rights of minorities, whatever the attitudes of some other political constituency are. It's insane.
Well, it's not clear if the U.S. is running Venezuela or the West Midlands Police is, but it is clear that the vice president of Venezuela, is on board with the idea of the Jews did it wherever something happens that they deem bad. That is the topic of today's episode of the reality show, the accusation that the Zionists, i.e. the Jews, were behind the arrest of Maduro. The reality show starts on this channel in a couple of minutes. Later tonight, in 4 hours, our new channel, The Cultural Review, debuts with its first video, our discussion of the show Pluribus. Make sure you
Boy, objectivists everywhere are talking about pluribus. And I happen to have been the beneficiary of I went through an art museum with Luke Tavers once, one of his, experience art thing. He is an expert on all matters aesthetic. And so it's really exciting. Everyone, please check out this channel today, later on.
Yeah, Luke Travers is great, and I don't think he's ever been on the reality show. He certainly hasn't recently, so that's somebody you don't get to see here. Iyad Eichel, Alejandro, and myself are people you do get to see here, but mostly talking about war. Here we're talking about Pluribus. Make sure you check that out. And thanks, James. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned for the reality show.
Please be safe, my friends.
We all know that if you want to bankrupt somebody, you just get them hooked on gambling, drugs, or a really attractive woman with really expensive tastes. Unless, of course, you're a bloodthirsty dictator, in which case you can be bankrupted simply by your love of killing people. That seems to be what's happening to Vladimir Putin, as the latest stats coming out of Ukraine show that Ukraine's drones are killing more Russians than Putin can bring in. But even worse for Putin is that his own generals seem to be turning against him. Now, December 2025, the stats are in, and Russian battlefield losses roughly equal the number of troops Moscow was able to bring in the same period. This is according to a statement by Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi. Now, what's interesting is that this is really part of two very, very questionable numbers that are really bode poorly for Putin. First off, the Ukrainian numbers have 33,000 Russian soldiers neutralized. Now, neutralized generally in the parlance, Ukraine parlance, is going to be either killed or neutralized generally means unable to function or lose combat effectiveness on the battlefield. So a tank may be neutralized, for example, if its main gun no longer functions, even if it can still drive. A soldier might be neutralized if he no longer has a weapon that works. This is basically a way of encompassing all kinds of other weird techniques that can lead to a soldier not fighting. But in this case, when it comes to drones neutralize someone by killing them or wounding them severely. So they're saying that 33,000 Russian soldiers were neutralized in the month of December. That is, by the way, an absolutely insane number. But what's crazy is the figure includes only cases confirmed by video footage. And they actually disclose that these numbers come from the Ukraine Delta system. This is essentially a Discord, I'm simplifying it here, but not by much, a Discord server that spans the entirety of the Ukrainian armed forces, in which you can look at battle maps of any unit, see the live feeds of almost any drone. The fact that it is accessible via the regular normie internet and that Russia hasn't gotten access to it is kind of insane. Or maybe Russia has hacked into it and it literally doesn't matter. But the insane part is that units, or according to Ukraine, in order to get 33,000 kills, carried out about 10 times that many missions, and ground-based robotic systems rolled out 2,000 different times. By the way, guys, for those of you that contributed to our last fundraiser, we actually bought a ground drone, or a number of ground drones for units, but we also bought one that actually was a recovery ground drone that goes out and scoops up ground drones that have been attacked and are still salvageable. So now, what's wild is that the number of kills by drones increased 31% in December, and the number of Russian personnel hit rose by more than a quarter. And again, these are insane scaling numbers. 30%, if you can do 30% month over month as a startup, you are crushing it. And that's what these guys are doing too. The unmanned systems forces, an entire branch, literally on par with, say, in the US, the Navy or the Air Force. They said, listen, unmanned systems forces are their own branch dedicated to it. 2.2% of Ukraine's total military personnel, but Jesus Christ, 2.2% of your military personnel doing something like 50% or more of the total enemy casualties is literally insane. Now, that doesn't mean that every drone pilot is a part of the unmanned systems forces. Unmanned systems forces seems to focus on things like high-level coordination, high-level logistics, high-level technical expertise. Most of these units are doing it inside their own operation, right? So, for example, when I was in Ukraine, I saw the operation by 3rd Assault Brigade, right? They had a drone lab where they were preparing drones, getting them combat ready. They also had a drone experimental lab where they were designing new drones that could, or improving on existing drones to make them even more combat effective. And so the pressure and the scale of these operations is astounding. What's crazy is that it's so effective, in fact, that Putin's own officers are starting to turn against what they call cannon fodder tactics. Now, this isn't because Russian officers suddenly developed an empathy for their soldiers, right? After 4 years, if you don't have some sympathy for your soldiers now, you're never going to get it. But instead, it's because it's not working, right? Russian military personnel are lots of officers who, again, have the political clout to actually get their assignments changed, are begging to be moved away from Pokrovsk and Donetsk, where, again, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces keep killing them. And there's also allegations that higher level commanders are literally just drunk all of the time, that reportedly a lot of the commanders are lying to Putin. Putin literally, he may actually believe he's got the Ukrainians surrounded in Kupiansk, right? It's kind of been increasingly weird the way he literally had a press conference about how the Ukrainians were about to be exterminated in Kupiansk when, well, I got bad news, man. I think the Russian troops here are surrounded in the wrong direction. But it's probably because the officers are literally just lying to him about the effectiveness of their tactics. In fact, a lot of Russian officers in Pokrovsk are begging to be reassigned to the rear in order to escape getting literally smoked by a drone. And what I think is, though, really telling here, they talk about officers in the front lines who are demotivated, poorly oriented to local condition, and they perceive Pokrovsk as a dangerous posting. They're increasingly submitting reports requesting transfer to rear or more peaceful frontline areas. They are constantly afraid of strikes by missile systems and guerrillas, and local residents are providing data on their command posts to the Ukrainian forces. And so, given this, a lot of them are drunk literally all the time and are also being lied to by their subordinate commanders about the actual state of their forces. But I think all of this, though, is an outgrowth of the fundamentally broken nature of the Russian tactical environment, right? So they're not so much saying this doesn't work, but they are unable to justify massive casualties and minimal gains. They keep doing this because for a long time, for like 2 years, this was actually a sustainable method. Like the Wagner Group famously pioneered it in Bakhmut, and then it went from being the thing Wagner does to being the thing the whole Russian military does. And that is to have a mass of low training conscripts conducting these infiltration missions, and in the rear, specialized troops, drone pilots, artillery crews, etc., conducting a basic level of fire support. The problem is those poorly trained conscripts have a massive attrition rate that relies on a huge recruitment budget coming in to the front. And for and I think commanders are finally realizing, listen, I am going to get exposed here for never having been able to really achieve the battlefield gains I claim to be able to achieve. And now I'm also finding myself without the replacement troops. And now I have to explain why those towns I said I liberated, I now literally don't have the troops to even hold the areas that I said were totally secure. It's a little bit like, like spending yourself into bankruptcy. As long as your income is big, you can get away with a lot of bullshit. But once the income drops even a little bit and you can't meet those expenses every month, then the creditors all come calling. And so I think for Putin, it sounds like his own creditors are starting to come calling. Because remember, the Russians are not going to suddenly find a hidden cave full of a bunch of desperate, drunk 50-year-old Russian men, their ideal demographic. The number of people willing to sign on to this is diminishing. And again, when you're talking about annihilating 30,000 people, every batch, every month of people that gets exterminated means that more and more Russians are going to be deterred from signing up for this. And so that number is going to sink as the Ukrainian number of drones and the effectiveness of their drone tech is going to only increase. Anyway, guys, thanks to GMAT Club, Henry Roosier.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. I guess an update on the Shanny and Rev situation is that Shanny went to sleep. Rev, Shanny and Jason. Shanny went to sleep. Jason, I don't know what happened to him. Quick update. Quick double check. There is nothing. What I do want to do, though, is I want to do that.
Just.
Oh, excellent. Okay, it worked. I think. Oh, there we go. No, there we go. Oh, shit. Oh, you can actually see what I'm trying to do. Okay, so why did Israel recognize Somaliland? I've always wanted to know why that is. Oh, we got Professor James Kerr. Let's see if what he can tell us. I've always wanted to know this.
Why exactly did Israel recognize Somaliland? For more than 30 years, this African territory has been seeking international acceptance. However, despite building democratic institutions and maintaining an unprecedented degree of peace in an unstable region, no member of the United Nations has been willing to recognize it as an independent country. Until now. On the 26th of December 2025, amidst a chorus of global condemnation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that his government had established diplomatic relations with Somaliland. So, why exactly did Israel take such a significant step? And what exactly does it mean for Somaliland, the region, and the broader international system? Recognition is central to international relations. It's how states formally accept one another as equal members of the global system. It also allows embassies to be set up, treaties to be signed, and diplomatic relations to be established. However, recognition isn't automatic, nor is it governed by a central international authority. Instead, it's a sovereign political act. Every country decides for itself who it recognizes and who it doesn't. This exclusive right of recognition is especially sensitive in cases involving breakaway territories. In such situations, recognition isn't about making the typical legal judgment of whether a territory meets the established criteria for statehood. Instead, it's a highly significant political decision that often carries broader implications. Aside from the effects on relations with the state that claims sovereignty over the breakaway territory, it also challenges fundamental principles such as the respect for the territorial integrity of states. This is why recognition of de facto states is so rare and so controversial. Somaliland is located in the Horn of Africa. Djibouti is to its northwest, Ethiopia to its south, and Somalia lies to the east. Meanwhile, with the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea to its north, it lies across from Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula. Its population stands at around 5 million and is mainly made up of Sunni Muslims from the Izak, one of the main Somali clans. Somaliland's modern political history begins with British colonial rule. In June 1960, it finally gained independence as the state of Somaliland. However, just days later, it voluntarily united with neighbouring Italian Somaliland to its south to form the Somali Republic. But while the decision was driven by a shared sense of Somali nationalism, the union was profoundly unequal. Political power and economic resources were concentrated in the south, in the capital, Mogadishu, while the northern regions were increasingly marginalised. This alienation increased after a military government took power in 1969. Under the country's dictator, Mohamed Siad Barre, the north faced brutal repression. This would last until May 1991. As the Barre regime was overthrown and Somalia collapsed into a brutal civil war, Somaliland seized the opportunity to declare independence. Over the next 3 decades, Somaliland began an ambitious process of state building. While Somalia sank deeper into chaos, it established its own political institutions, currency, armed forces, and held regular elections. As a result, Somaliland came to be seen as an island of stability in a deeply troubled region. And even though this reputation has been tarnished in recent years by delayed elections, rising political tensions, and violent clashes in its eastern areas where its control is now contested, it's nevertheless remained far more functional than Somalia, which has struggled to re-establish stability. But despite these achievements, Somaliland's campaign for international recognition made no progress. While it established informal relations with several major countries, including Britain and the United States, this didn't lead to formal recognition. Likewise, suggestions that Ethiopia or the United Arab Emirates, both of which have been eager to develop Somaliland's valuable port facilities, could recognise the territory, these came to nothing. Even talk that the Trump administration might recognise it have proved fruitless, at least until now. The only notable, though limited moment of progress came in 2020 when Somaliland established relations with Taiwan. And it's for all these reasons that Israel's decision marks such a dramatic break. In a surprise announcement made on the 26th of December, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Israel had formally recognised Somaliland as an independent state and that the two sides were establishing diplomatic relations. In addition to opening embassies, they'd also agreed to develop economic and security cooperation. Needless to say, the news was greeted with jubilation in Hargeisa, the Somaliland capital. After 30 years in diplomatic limbo, it had finally won acceptance from its first UN member state. However, beyond this, the announcement has been roundly criticised. For a start, Somalia has reacted with fury, condemning Israel's decision as a violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Meanwhile, broader international reactions have been overwhelmingly negative. Reiterating their commitment to Somalia's territorial integrity, African states have warned against unilateral actions that could destabilize the region. So too have Arab states, calling out Israel's decision as another example of its disregard for international norms. Indeed, the matter was even brought before the UN Security Council. But while Somalia and its supporters demanded that the decision be formally condemned, the United States defended Israel's right to choose its own diplomatic relations. This, in effect, has blocked any binding UN resolution against Israel and closed the door to any formal sanctions for its recognition. But of course, Israel's decision raises a number of important questions. First of all, there's the issue of why did Israel take such a controversial step? The most obvious explanation is strategic geography. Somaliland occupies a highly sensitive location near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. A significant proportion of global trade passes through this narrow waterway. And in recent years, it's become a significant security concern due to attacks by Iranian-backed Houthi forces operating from neighboring Yemen. From Israel's perspective, Somaliland's location at this critical choke point is invaluable, offering opportunities for intelligence gathering, security cooperation, and direct access to a region of growing strategic importance. But while this explanation certainly makes sense, there's possibly a more sinister element to the story. Reports have suggested that Somaliland has been earmarked as a potential location to resettle Palestinians expelled from Gaza. Of course, whether this is the case has yet to be seen. And this brings us to the second question. Was recognition really necessary? Could Israel have achieved these objectives without taking such a controversial step? In truth, the answer is almost certainly yes. It has a long history of operating quietly and pragmatically in sensitive regions without formal diplomatic ties, and Somaliland would almost certainly have been grateful for upgraded relations short of diplomatic recognition. In this sense, recognition probably wasn't necessary. But by taking such a monumental decision, Israel will almost certainly have cemented a long-term partnership based on profound gratitude. And this brings us to the third question. Can anything be done to reverse Israel's recognition? In simple terms, the answer is no. Again, recognition is a sovereign act. There's no legal mechanism to compel a state to withdraw this decision. While Somalia can protest the decision and lobby other countries to press Israel to change its mind, it's unlikely to change anything. Israel will have factored all this in before it made its move. The countries most likely to be furious about the decision are already angry with Israel. Meanwhile, Israel's allies won't see this as important enough to break ties. In this sense, the decision to recognize Somaliland comes at little cost for Israel's diplomatic standing. But while all these are important points, perhaps the most crucial question is what Israeli recognition is likely to mean. Will other countries now follow its lead, or will Somaliland remain isolated? If Israel remains the only recognizer, while Somaliland will certainly gain some practical benefits, it will remain largely outside the international system. In contrast, if others follow, the consequences would be profound. Of course, the most important actor at this stage is the United States. But while many will inevitably see Israel's move as a precursor to US recognition, Washington has so far remained cautious. While it defended Israel's right to decide on recognition within the Security Council, it was noticeable that it didn't support the actual decision itself. Instead, the United States has said that its position remains unchanged. And perhaps for good reason. Given the wave of condemnation we've seen, Washington may not want to antagonize either the African Union or key Arab partners over what many in the US would see as a relatively minor issue. At this stage, therefore, a more likely scenario is a prolonged period of hesitation as Washington assesses the costs and benefits of following Israel's example. But if it also recognized Somaliland, things could change radically, especially if Ethiopia and United Arab Emirates then followed suit. This could potentially open the way for many more countries to follow. But for now, there's a deep irony to this whole story. For Somaliland, recognition by the United States or another African country would perhaps have been the most valuable validation of its claim to statehood. In contrast, Israel's decision risks politicizing its cause and tying it to broader Middle Eastern geopolitical struggles. All this will almost certainly complicate future recognition efforts rather than accelerating them. And yet, none of this diminishes the significance of what has happened. For Somalilanders, this is a moment of genuine jubilation. After 30 years of trying, the first step towards broader international recognition has finally been taken. Likewise, for Israel, it represents a strategic foothold in a critical region. Meanwhile, for the international system as a whole, this move is a stark reminder that recognition is never simply about law or principle. It's about power, timing, and political calculations. Once recognition is granted, even by a single state, the international landscape is changed in ways that cannot easily be undone. In this sense, Israel's decision to recognize Somaliland is another sign that the old rules of international relations are now changing. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that YouTube thinks you might find useful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.
2 months after the Europa League match, from which Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were banned in what can only be objectively described as an anti-Semitic decision to ban specific
Oh, I think I just lost my place there. Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. I was going to actually look for another video on Somaliland. I want to find out more about it. Let me see. There was one. Somaliland. That was one position. I want to watch something else. I want to see another point of view about Somaliland and Israel's recognition. Somaliland. Nothing. No one deems it very important, Somaliland. Let's see. I'm kind of looking for an Israeli source, actually. Let's go back to FDD. Usually they got something to say. Somaliland. Sorry for keeping you waiting like this, but these things take time. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. I have a video on Somaliland. Right, give me a moment and I will bring it. I'm going to give you a 10-second break and I'll bring it in, all right? Maybe I'll be quick enough, but I doubt it. Yeah, I thought not. All right, so we've got the FDD now. We can bring these guys in and start the show.
Functioning, independent republic on the Horn of Africa. It's Muslim, pro-peace, pro-stability, and anti-Islamist. One nation has now officially recognized Somaliland as a sovereign state. That nation, in case you haven't guessed, is Israel. Now, that's infuriated neighboring Somalia, which is a hotbed of al-Shabaab, an armed Islamist and jihadi group that pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda. Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Djibouti, and Nigeria also are furious over Israel's recognition of Somaliland. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer doesn't think the people of Somaliland and their democratically elected government have the right to decide their own future. On what basis? His Majesty's government says they care about the territorial integrity of Somalia. But Somaliland has been detached from Somalia for 34 years. Okay, one more data point. The leaders and people of Somaliland want to join the Abraham Accords, the agreements brokered by President Trump that are establishing peaceful and cooperative relations between Israel and several of its Arab and Muslim neighbors. Lots to unpack here. To help us do that is Bashir Gulf, Somaliland's representative in the United States, hopefully soon to be Somaliland's ambassador to the United States. He's also a longtime journalist and translator. With us as well as Michael Rubin, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and director of policy analysis at the Middle East Forum. Michael began visiting Somaliland years ago. He and Bashir have even invited me to tag along. I clearly erred by not taking them up on their offer. But you know how it is. You may even know how I am, or at least who I am. In case you don't, I'm Cliff May, and I'm glad you're joining us too here on Foreign Policy. Well, welcome, Bashir, and welcome, Michael. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, mate. Thank you very much, today. Thank you.
You know, I want to start by talking just a little bit about the Horn of Africa, because it's a special place. I know because years ago I spent a fair amount of time reporting from Ethiopia, which borders Somalia and Somaliland, and which has provinces, and particularly the Ogaden, which are populated by ethnic Somalis. Maybe start, Michael, just with a few sentences about the Horn of Africa and why it's special in terms of its relations. Well, it's part of Africa and kind of part of the Middle East too. Am I wrong in that?
You're absolutely right, Cliff. The Horn of Africa has always been attached economically, commercially, culturally to the Middle East and to Africa. It really is a crossroads, but that shouldn't surprise given its adjacency to primary trade routes throughout the region. If you look at the Somali flag, many people know the pale blue background with the white five-pointed star. That five-pointed star represents the 5 parts of Greater Somalia, which is Somalia as we know today, Somaliland, the Ogaden in Ethiopia, which you mentioned, Djibouti, which is largely ethnically Somali, as well as the northeast province of Kenya as well. And so what we're really talking about is a region in flux, a region that, not unlike in the 1950s and 1960s, is beset by a destabilizing ethnic nationalism. Back in the day, it was Gamal Abdel Nasser and Arab nationalism. In the Horn of Africa today, it's Somali nationalism. But Somaliland and Somalia have always had their own distinct histories, going back not only to the Cold War, but before to the British colonial period when Djibouti was French, British Somaliland, what we call Somaliland today, was a British protectorate, and the rest of Somalia was controlled by the Italians.
Right. And Bashir, doing even a little more history, if you go back, way back, it was the regions of Somalia were not under foreign empires like the Ottoman Empire. They were sultanates, I guess, until the time when, as Michael's saying, you had the British Empire, the French Empire, the Italian Empire taking control of various parts of Somalia, and Ethiopia, again, holding. I mean, the reason it's the shape it is not because Somalis hug the coast, but because if ethnic Somali territories were all together, it would be the whole kind of eastern section of Ethiopia plus the Red Sea coast. Do I have that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the history of the Somali people, Somali region, goes back to ancient history, up to the pharaohs and the Chinese civilization. They were trading with the Somali people, especially if you look at the ports of Zaila and Berbera in Somaliland. They have a long history, and there have been sultanates, as you rightly mentioned it. But then when we come back from that, then for example, in the Somaliland area, it was the Ottoman Empire which came to Somaliland earlier than the British. And the Egyptians were ruling the Somaliland people by proxy under the Ottoman Empire. Then came the British and the other European, powers like Michael has rightly said. For example, Djibouti came at the French, and it was called French Somali Coast. Somaliland came under British, was Somaliland Protectorate, and Somalia Italiana on the other side, that was called Somalia South. And then the two regions of the Somali region in Ethiopia, we don't usually call Ogaden. That is a kind of a colonial name, because it's only one clan out of many, many clans living in the Somali region of Ethiopia has taken that name. It was and Haile Selassie kind of, who labeled that region in order to just remove the word Somali from the region. But it's a Somali region. And then in Kenya, it was the Northern Frontier District, or what was called at that time NFD, which was the Somali region also. So yeah, that was the colonial part. Then when that was the colonial part, yes.
So Michael, okay, so colonialism ends around 1960. Tell what happens then.
Okay, this is the key issue, Cliff, and I'm glad you asked it. On June 26, 1960, the British gave British Somaliland its independence. It was recognized by all 5 members of the UN Security Council at the time, as well as about 25 other countries. So when Somaliland became independent, it had borders that had been defined for almost a century by the British Protectorate, by treaties with neighbors, and so forth. This isn't analogous to the Kurds or to the Palestinians, who have never had their own state. We're talking about a reemergence of an independent state. And basically, what happened is Somaliland was independent for 5 days. On July 1st, 1960, the Italian part of Somaliland got its independence, and the British Somaliland officials made a controversial decision to join and merge with Italian Somaliland to form the Somali Republic, or what became Somalia. Now, there's a lot of controversy over what happened, not only because of the poor marriage in hindsight, but it was actually never ratified by the parliaments and so forth. So there's a question about the legality. The point of this, however, is in 1991, when Somalia descended into state failure, and we all remember Black Hawk Down, that era and so forth, Somaliland decided, none of this. We're done with this marriage. We're going to reassert our independence, and they've governed themselves for far longer than they were ever part of Somalia. Now, the other key point that needs to be recognized is the Cold War dynamics. There's a dictator in Somalia during the Cold War named Mohammed Siad Barre. At first, he was a Soviet puppet. Then, this is a really strange aspect of Cold War history, but the Horn of Africa flipped, where Ethiopia went from being an American ally to a Soviet ally. Somalia went from being a Soviet ally to an American ally. The Berbera airstrip, which we hear so much about, was actually a NASA Space Shuttle emergency landing strip, in theory. The point of this, however, is this dictator, Siad Barre, decided to wage a campaign of genocide against the clan, which is predominant in Somaliland. So you're not just talking about a state that decided they no longer wanted to be part of this marriage. You're talking about a state that was subject to a genocide in which hundreds of thousands of people were killed, in which 80% of the capital city was destroyed by mercenaries and so forth. And so, the analogy I use would be saying that Somaliland has to be part of Somalia is like telling the Rwandans, the Tutsi-dominated Rwandans, they have to bring back the Hutu genocidaire to let them rule, because what happened in 1994 wasn't legitimate. It makes no sense. It's immoral. But of course, there's also a strategic aspect of this, which is front and center today.
Okay, so a couple of things. One is that genocide that was waged against the clan that's predominant in Somaliland, only one nation tried to bring that to the attention of the UN and the international community. And again, guess which nation that was? It was Israel, but no one wanted to pay attention. Again, you guys can correct me if you think I'm wrong on any of this. Maybe start with that. That is correct? Back then?
Bashir is a survivor of this, so I defer the floor to him.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And 35 years now, coming May, we will be celebrating the 35th anniversary of Somaliland restoration of independence. Usually the media wrongly characterizes Somaliland independence as, for example, breakaway region or secessionist region, which is not. As Michael has actually presented, Somaliland was an independent country in 1960. It was one of the African countries that became independent in 1960 and was recognized by almost 30 countries before it did that wrong marriage or merge with Somalia. And then if I go back a little to that, the Somaliland people were immediately disappointed with the union, with that kind of merger. And the reason is immediately they got marginalized. And the Somaliland military officers that was left by the British in Somaliland, when they realized that this was a wrong marriage, they tried to make a coup d'etat and reclaim Somaliland independence again. It failed. It was aborted. And then the military officers were court-martialed in Mogadishu, the capital. The Somalilanders have hired a British lawyer for them, and this is what I'm coming to. And then when the case went on, the trial went on, the British lawyer came to the conclusion that because they were accused of national treason. And at the end of the day, the lawyer said there's no basis for this case because they did not commit national treason because the union was never ratified, and he proved that, and they were released.
Right.
So that shows that union has never happened. Then in that year, in 1961, there was a referendum for the country's constitution, for the Somali Republic. And then almost the Somaliland people rejected that with 90%, overwhelmingly, they rejected that. Nobody listened to that because the other side was more populous and it has taken the day. Then let's come now to 1991. When the central government collapsed and, the brutality and the atrocities that Michael has, rightfully presented happened, Somaliland people came together and they said, you know what? No more. No more union, no more problems, no more wrong, bad marriage. Let us reclaim our independence. And then in 1918, in 1991, Somalilanders have reclaimed their independence and now 35 years. All these 35 years, we have been knocking doors all over the world. The African countries, the Arab world, the Muslim world, Europeans, everywhere. And nobody opened the door for us. Everybody turned a blind eye to Somaliland. Not even a sympathy, not even listening to us, not even taking our case for discussion in the African Union or the Arab League. And then it is Israel which has come now on board and said, what? We are going to break the glass ceiling. And then everybody's angry. Why? I don't understand.
Hey, Cliff.
Yeah, Michael,
Cliff,
yeah.
If I can just insert for a second. I'm a historian, so I'm paid to predict the past. And my detractors might say that I get that right only about half the time. But I think when we're talking about what happened in Somalia and Somaliland with the dissolution of the Union, it's important to point out that there's other precedents here. We all remember between 1958 and 1971, Egypt and Syria merged into the so-called United Arab Republic. And then they dissolved. And many of the countries which are now condemning the recognition of Somaliland recognize Egypt and Syria. In fact, Egypt itself condemned this, and they're being hypocritical here. Also in 1982, also in Africa, you had a union between Senegal and Gambia, the Senegambia Confederation. That too didn't work out. And in 1991, they reverted back to their constituent parts, Senegal and Gambia. And again, I checked yesterday, most of the countries that are objecting to Somaliland's independence have indeed recognized both Senegal and Gambia and aren't trying to keep them in the Senegambia Confederation. So there's a lot of hypocrisy on the world stage, even as people talk about rule of law.
Yeah, and the idea of territorial integrity. I think you point this out in a Middle East Observer article. There was once a country called Yugoslavia. It's now several different countries. There was a Soviet Union. Well, Putin is trying to restore it by forcing Ukraine back under the rule of the Kremlin. But it was dissolved. That's okay. There was a country called Czechoslovakia. They decided the Czechs and the Slovaks, close as they are, they wanted their own countries. It was kind of an amicable divorce. This kind of thing happens all the time, and there's no hue and cry from the UN and the international community about territorial integrity. People have a right, especially when you're talking about people who in Somaliland, it seems to me, have established a democracy, which as opposed to Somalia, which has not established democracy. And by the way, we should just point out this, as I understand it, Bashar, Somaliland has been very sick without getting aid, as they had huge amounts of aid flowing into Gaza and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, all kind. You got no aid, but you established a functioning economy as well as a functioning polity. I've got that right too, haven't I?
Yeah, you got that right. Very, very right. And let me add to the examples you gave earlier. Also, for example, in 1971, December 6th, India unilaterally recognized Bangladesh.
Right.
And nobody made an outrage. And Bangladesh came out of a war that time. Actually, that's the day the war stopped between Bangladesh, which was eastern Pakistan, and the rest of Pakistan. There was no government in Bangladesh like the way it's Somaliland now. And nobody make an outrage. And that shows the hypocrisy of the word in the United Nations also. Yes, Somaliland, we didn't have access to international financial institutions because we were not recognized. So what we did is we have to rely on ourselves. We have to rely on our own resources, on our own income, on our own taxation. We built on our own institutions. So the country has been built by its own people, by its own bootstraps, as Americans say. Yes, and that should be a model for Africa. Michael has written a lot about that. But if I give you another example, there is a professor in the University of Chicago called James Robinson, and he co-authored a book called Why Nations Fail, and last year they got the Nobel Prize for Economy. He has written actually about the case of Somaliland when he was presenting when he was receiving the Nobel Prize in Oslo, and he was presenting his case. He actually took Somaliland as an example and said, wait a minute, if African countries, when they became 1960 independent, if they just behaved like Somaliland and they didn't take any foreign aid and they relied on themselves, what would have been the African continent? And that's what Somaliland is, actually a role model for that. But instead of appreciating that, and instead of rewarding that, the international community is rewarding a failed state that is, infested with terrorism. And it actually defies the logic.
Cliff, if I could actually just insert for a second. We've referred to Somaliland as a democracy, and it's easy for all sorts of countries to call themselves a democracy. But for an audience that may not be familiar with Somaliland, it's important to recognize that the United States has provided Somalia proper with about $2 billion in order to stage one man, one vote elections. And Somalia has never been able to do it. When we talk about the government of Somalia, they select 400 people arbitrarily. I mean, clan leaders, politicians, and so forth. And then those 400 will elect a government. In Somaliland, there's been 10 different elections. Now, one of the things that really struck me as an outsider coming is one of these elections, with more than 1 million votes cast, was decided by less than 100 votes. And it led to a transfer of government that was completely peaceful. In fact, all of Somaliland's elections have led to transfers of power, completely peaceful. But the other thing that really struck me, for all we're providing assistance to other countries which are incapable or disinterested in creating democracy, Somaliland contracted to become the first country in the world to secure voter identification with biometric iris scans. We still have disputes in the United States about whether you can show a driver's license, but Somaliland's elections are perhaps the most secure in the world because of this. And this is also one of the reasons why there hasn't been disputes when, as in the last election, the incumbent is ousted and a new party leader takes his place.
For those who also remember piracy coming out of this area, and I remember writing about this and reading about this, there's some books on this, it was coming out of what is now, what we call Somalia, not out of Somaliland. The Somaliland has patrolled its coasts and prevented that kind of piracy. That's a great achievement, because I remember a time people saying, I don't know how we stop piracy. I don't know how it can be done.
Somaliland actually imprisoned the pirates, as Bashir can say.
Yeah, we have a small coast guard that actually, protects our coastline, and we never experienced piracy because our small coast guard was protecting Somaliland waters, and we prevented terrorism from the country. We had only one attack of terrorism in 2008, and that's all. Because the Somaliland people, we actually rely on human intelligence, as Michael has seen many times, human intel. So, for example, if today a new person comes and rents a house next in any area in Hargeisa, for example, in any other city, if the people don't know, the families, the neighboring families will just call the police and say there is somebody we don't know. Maybe you have to check. And that's how the human intelligence works in Somaliland. And we have no terrorism, actually. And, we have fulfilled all the requirements of statehood according to the Montevideo, convention. But then the world doesn't listen to all these values of democracy and elections and free market economy and free press and all these things. No, I mean, they preach all these things as a lip service, but when it comes to reality, then we see how they deal with, for example, Somaliland.
Now, Somaliland has been essentially independent, developing an economy, developing its political system over the past 34 years. Michael, why now has Israel decided, okay, we're going to recognize the sovereignty? We're going to take the lashings, the tongue lashings that have come from the UN and other places for this. Why did they decide to do this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not Israeli, and ultimately the Israelis will need to explain that decision on their own. That said, you've got a situation where a lot of people saw this coming. They just didn't know who the first country would be. The Ethiopians, of course, the largest neighbor to Somaliland, regularly recognize or receive the Somaliland president equal to other heads of state in meetings in Addis Ababa. And the Ethiopians always used to joke that they wouldn't be the first country to recognize Somaliland, but they're not going to be the third country either. And there's a lot of other countries in that sort of category. When you actually drive around the streets of Hargeisa, you see consulates for Turkey, offices for Denmark, for Djibouti, for Kenya, for the United Kingdom, and so forth. I mean, one of the big discussions ongoing in the State Department, even before Israel's actions, was whether the United States would establish a consulate in Hargeisa or an office more modeled after what we operate in Taiwan. And of course, the Taiwanese have also established relations with Somaliland, so let's not forget that. But then, look, there's also a strategic angle, and it would be disingenuous to ignore it. Somaliland has a 528-mile coastline along the Gulf of Aden. And of course, what's across from the Gulf of Aden? You have the Houthis, you have Yemen, and so forth. And you have Somalia on one side, and you mentioned Puntland, where the piracy was, which has an Islamic State problem. Somalia proper has a Al-Shabaab problem, which is an Al-Qaeda affiliate. You have Djibouti, which has a China problem. I mean, it's basically a satrapy of China today. And so you have this area, which is not only democratic, but it's secure. It stopped the weapons trafficking between Somalia and Yemen. For those who prioritize the environment, it's the leader in Africa on countering the illegal wildlife trade, the cheetah trade, the falcon trade, and so forth. And so, again, you have a country doing everything right. And the final point here, and I mentioned this before, is you have Berbera. According to the World Bank, Berbera is the top sub-Saharan African port now, which is astounding considering that Somaliland is unrecognized, but so many commercial companies actually trust the Somaliland government because of rule of law, that the Somaliland port in Berbera has surpassed Djibouti. It's surpassed Mombasa in Kenya. Right adjacent to the port is this airport, which was renovated by the United Arab Emirates. It has, until recently, the second largest airstrip in Africa. I think there's a couple countries which have now surpassed it. This is where the United States during the Cold War used to base its forces. So, Cliff, I used to teach on American aircraft carriers. And when we would have aircraft carriers patrol the Red Sea, it takes 4,000 to 5,000 men to crew a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. If we fly Ospreys, You know, those planes that take off as helicopters and then transform into planes. It only takes 4 or 5 people to transform to crew them, and they go much faster than the aircraft carriers. And so if there is a base in Berbera for freedom of navigation operations, for counterterrorism operations, it really is, there's seldom a solution in international relations, which is so what's the word? I mean, it's so perfect in all of its, so elegant in all of its solutions. But this is one of those, which is why perhaps the Israelis recognize what the Americans would.
So if you or I were advising President Trump right now, would we not say, look, it's in the U.S. interest to recognize Somaliland? One, it wants to join your Abraham Accords. It wants to contribute to that. Two, it's right across from where the Houthis are. If you want somebody to fight the Houthis, you don't want America to have to do too much. You might be able to get the Israelis to do that without having to fly thousands of miles away and bomb tunnels and mountains. Maybe it could be done from there, because the Houthis, after all, they are violating basic international law that America has always guaranteed, which is freedom of the seas, by stopping commercial shipping, not stopping, by bombing, rocketing commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb, the kind of that tight strait between those two. From the strict point of view of American national interest, not to mention values, which also come in, America should be recognizing Somaliland and welcoming Bashir as the ambassador.
You're very right, actually. And if you look at it, well, anyway, in the Congress they always call me the ambassador, so I now accept it,
Your Excellency, I will call you Your Excellency.
Yeah, thank you. There's a great power competition going on in the Horn of Africa now. I remember one time reading a long time ago a book about Africa, and the writer characterized it that Somali region in the Horn of Africa as the cockpit of the world. So that was during the Cold War, and still it's the cockpit of the world. It's a very critical region, very strategically very, very important, as you can see, where 30% of world trade passes through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. So now, as you know, there's a great power competition there. There are the Turkey, who really want to recreate and revive the Ottoman Empire in the region. And they almost own Somalia. Everything they own in Somalia, all the resources. And they have the biggest military base in the world. They have in Mogadishu. Recently they have even built a base for where they can launch satellites and missiles and things like that. So they own the place and they own all the resources. They want to dominate the whole region. That's one thing. China is also another one which wants to dominate the whole region, and they are present in Somalia, Djibouti, and Ethiopia, and Kenya, and everywhere except Somaliland. So Somaliland is the only country that's actually countering all these influences, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Chinese. So America is only present in partially. I mean, they have a base in Djibouti, and that's the only place, and that place is very, very, very contrasted. There are so many other countries who have a base in that place, and the Chinese dominate the place, and they have also commercial ports in Djibouti. Somaliland has Berbera, which has been expanded by DP World of Dubai and made it a maritime hub for Africa. And you have Ethiopia with 110 million people, which will be the market for that port. So it is really natural. And even now, there's a new addition now. Egypt has also come to Djibouti and is building a port in Djibouti and ports in Assab of Eritrea. So it's only natural for Israel to be part of this. It's as a middle power or even a big power. Israel has to they have the right to also look after their interest in the region, because the Red Sea is an economic artery for the whole region.
Quick points. I want you to come back.
I'm not talking for Israel, but for Somaliland. So, if the interest is, in align, and we were looking for recognition for a long time, and Israel has come on board and said, you know what, we are going to recognize you. How can Somaliland people say no to that? This is what we were looking at all over the last 35 years. And nobody was listening to us. And like Michael said, every country we go to, what we're telling us, we will be the second country. We will not be the first. Now we have the first. Okay? The bet is who will be the second.
Michael, 2 quick points. One is also Eritrea left Ethiopia. Nobody complained about the territorial integrity of Ethiopia there, even though it left Ethiopia landlocked, which I never thought the Ethiopians would allow Eritrea to break off that way and leave them landlocked. But they did. 2, Bashir mentions that there's a U.S. base in Djibouti as well as a Chinese base. You'll know this. I'm just guessing that at this point, the U.S. base is dwarfed by the Chinese base and by Chinese influence, and it's probably a danger in having a U.S. base that close to a larger Chinese base, no?
You're absolutely right, Cliff. First, great point with regard to Eritrea. I would just add that the United States supported the succession of South Sudan from Sudan. The difference between Eritrea and South Sudan and Somaliland is Somaliland has capacity. It's not going to launch to become a failed state because it's already been operating for 30 some odd years as a functioning independent state. But you're absolutely right to bring up the case of Djibouti. According to, your audience knows that whenever the United States has military in a country, we have something called a status of forces agreement, oftentimes referred to in the acronym obsessed Pentagon as a SOFA. With regard to our status of forces agreement in Djibouti, it says that the Djiboutians need to be the sole air traffic controllers, which has become an increasing problem for our military aircraft because the Djiboutians aren't always the most competent, especially after 4 p.m. when they're chewing pot, which, as you know, is it's not a narcotic, but it's a cultural stimulant, which is deemed illegal in the United States. Regardless, we've had incidents with our U.S. naval aviation in which our pilots landing in Djibouti have been blinded by Chinese lasers fired from the Chinese base just about 4 miles away. And so you're absolutely right. Berbera has space around it. And therefore, you wouldn't have this problem. The other important thing is it's outside the strategic choke point of the Bab al-Manda. The other point I just want to make
from the Red Sea,
in response to your initial question is, Donald Trump may not have studied this, but I'm sure behind the scenes he's asking his advisors now. And what he's going to find is most of his advisors support Somaliland independence. In 2023, largely through the good efforts of Bashir, the National Defense Authorization Act included a mandate by which the U.S. government was it was made mandatory for the State Department to study Somaliland independence and what the United States position towards Somaliland would be. And the reason for that is the Pentagon wants Somaliland independence. The Central Intelligence Agency wants Somaliland independence. The FBI supports Somaliland independence because they've used Somaliland's good offices in order to help flesh out some investigations and so forth. The State Department has been dragging its feet simply because the State Department has traditionally wanted to prioritize good relations with Mogadishu. When you're a U.S. ambassador, there's 2 types of U.S. ambassadors broadly. Those who will stand up for U.S. interests no matter what tension they cause in the region, and those ambassadors who think that if they only ingratiate themselves enough to the ruling leader, that those good relations equal good relations between our states. We all remember Frank Ricciardoni back in 2005, who famously told a group at, I think, University of Cairo, that Hosni Mubarak was so popular that he could even win elections in the United States. This is shortly before the Arab Spring. That's not the type of ambassador we need. Unfortunately, for too long, that's been the type of ambassador we have in Mogadishu. And so what we've seen is Congress, Ted Cruz especially, stepping up to try to force the State Department to change, to basically break out of this inertia and recognize what a strategic coup it would be to re-recognize Somaliland.
Right. While we're talking about Trump, one more thing you've written about this, Michael, I believe, and that is Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar is a thorn in the president's side, and it should be a thorn in everybody's side. Bashir, I may get this wrong, so you help me with this. But most of the people in Somaliland are from the Isaac clan, and they were the ones who were the the targets of the genocide by the dictator Siad Barre. He's from, I believe, the Darad clan, and I believe Ilhan Omar is too, in that her father was part of that. Was a general who took part of that genocide. Am I oversimplifying, or am I getting that wrong?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I will leave that for Michael to actually to elaborate. But one thing I can say about Ilhan Omar is that she is deadly against Somaliland, and she campaigned in the Congress, and she was in the Foreign Relations Committee of the House, and she was against Somaliland. But the rest, I will just let Michael, elaborate.
Suffice to say that Ilhan Omar supposedly had her family comes from the Puntland area where the piracy was. It's from a different clan. But what really strikes me is when Ilhan Omar has gone back to talk to Somali audiences, including in Somalia, she often talks about Somalia as her home country and not the United States when she's speaking in Somali to, for lack of a better words, her constituents back in Somalia itself. Which raises questions whether she's trying to transport the dysfunctional Somali worldview into U.S. foreign policy. But, I don't see Ilhan Omar as the biggest problem here for the United States. Donald Trump has defined his presidency, both the first and perhaps even the second, standing up to China, recognizing malign Chinese influences. I would argue that during the first Trump term, whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump, whether you're Republican or Democrat, one thing which analysts and historians can agree on is that is when the debate about China's intentions ended, and both Democrats and Republicans recognized that the People's Republic of China isn't just a competitor or isn't a partner, but it's a competitor and a malign one at that. We need to recognize that Somaliland has allied itself with Taiwan, one of only two African countries to do so. While just a week ago, before Israel's recognition of Somaliland, the president of Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, gave a full-throated endorsement to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan on Chinese television. And this is the man whom we're siding with? I think Donald Trump needs to call Marco Rubio and Chris Landau. And from what I hear from inside the State Department, the problem is actually with Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau, and basically say, look, this nonsense needs to stop. We are going to support the country that opposes communist China, not support the country that ingratiates itself to it.
Also, Taiwan wants to be. Taiwan is independent. De facto, if not de jure. Also, it's it hasn't been part of China since the Ming Dynasty, I believe. I mean, it doesn't. People of Taiwan do not want to be ruled by the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping. They want to be allied with America. They want to be free and prosperous. The same you can say about Somaliland. And yet, dictators who dominate the UN, they want to say, no, we shouldn't be going along with them. By the way, the new national security strategy is not as good, in my view, on recognizing China for the adversary it is, rather than a competitor.
A quick tangent, Cliff, but did I ever tell you how I got myself banned and sanctioned in China?
No, do tell.
In 1936, and this as a former journalist, there's an American hagiographer named Edgar Snow.
Oh, I remember Edgar. Yes.
Walter Durante.
Yeah.
And I dug up, and I can provide this to you, an Edgar Snow interview with Mao Zedong, in which Mao Zedong said, our first item on our agenda has to be to push the Japanese out of China. And then we can continue and push the Japanese out of Chosin, which was the name of Korea at the time, and Formosa, which was the name of Taiwan at the time. And then Mao Zedong told Edgar Snow in 1936, and then both Korea and Taiwan can become independent. That's not necessarily the narrative that the communist Chinese today want, but it's something that Mao Zedong actually said. And the point here, when it comes to Somaliland, is too often in the United States, and I would say increasingly in Europe, our sense of history is only 4 or 8 years long. And when a new administration comes into power, we think that we can have a tabula rasa. But history is actually longer. And simply repeating a falsehood or spin doesn't actually make it true. You're absolutely right that over the past 500 years, mainland China has only controlled Taiwan for about 27 years because the Qing dynasty wasn't even considered Chinese.
Manchu, right?
It was
Or
considered
Manchurian?
Mongol.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to Somaliland too has always been separate from Somalia. And this notion that they need to be forced into an unhappy marriage is actually based on a false reading of history.
All right. What else do we need to discuss so that people understand this situation? Anything we've left out in this conversation that you want to add in?
Yeah, one thing probably talking about Taiwan, which has, Taiwan and Somaliland have established diplomatic relations. I think now it's more than 5 years. And China has been trying to do everything they can to frustrate Somaliland, to push Taiwan out of Somaliland. And as you know, Somaliland is the only second country that has diplomatic relations with Taiwan. With the other one is Swatini. So China is trying to put pressure, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, sometimes even trying to create insurgents against Somaliland so that Somaliland can expel the Taiwanese from its country. But Somaliland is standing, and they said no. So I think that calls for a question where the Western countries, including the United States, stand on the issue of Taiwan and democracy and freedom all over the world. So if Somaliland is standing alone in that region and countering the Chinese influence and countering the creation of a new Ottoman Empire, okay, and nobody is just coming to its and help or rescue, then it would be really a very what do you call very weird world in which we live. So for Israel to come out of that as a free country, a democratic country, and say, you know what, this country has been doing well. It's a success story. It's a reality on the ground. It's a country that fulfilled all the statehood requirements. So why not? And our interests align, and they came to recognize Somaliland. I think that's a very wise decision, which many countries has to follow.
And I'm just going to conclude, Cliff, with 2 quick points. Number one, a few years ago, I brought my then 9-year-old daughter to Somaliland. And we went from Hargeisa to Berber. You've probably seen some of those pictures. We didn't have security. We walked around in the capital. This isn't the Somalia which many people think about. It's a perfectly safe, secure place. I mean, it's famous for in the markets, people will go for their siesta and leave big bundles of cash sitting out because they know no one is going to touch them. That's number one. Number two, while the economy of Somaliland has traditionally revolved around livestock, the fact of the matter is Somaliland has transformed its economy from 1991 to the present, where it's become a little Silicon Valley.
Really?
In the Horn of Africa, where I've walked through the streets of Hargeisa, and many of the roads are unpaved in Hargeisa. In Berbera, it's much more modern. But you go into, for example, the headquarters of Somtel, or Telesom, I'm sorry, which is a multi-billion-dollar phone and mobile money business, and it's like walking into a NASA control room. Coca-Cola has the second largest bottling plant in Africa, because again, this is a country that, despite its lack of recognition, has made all the right choices and has cultivated an atmosphere where business and industry and tech can thrive. Famously, we have Venmo and Zelle and so forth in the United States, but they haven't really caught on the way they have in Africa. But when you look at the Habsburg and some of the other mobile money companies, which are Somaliland based, the fact of the matter is Somaliland has 99% penetration by mobile money, to the point where I once saw a beggar on one of my trips in front of a mosque saying basically the equivalent of, please, sir, can I have some change? Here is my mobile money account to donate money into. And the fact of the matter is, it really is an amazing society. It's not only a lesson, the United States, I would argue, needs to support it because it's important to support the countries that are doing everything right, rather than those like Kurdistan, which is very corrupt, or Palestinian society, which hasn't forsworn terror. Somaliland has made all the right choices, but at the same time, it really is an example of how corruption of how foreign aid can be corrupting and how there's a moral hazard to dumping money on problems rather than allowing people to take responsibility and have agency to solve their own problems. Going back to your question about Donald Trump, this is really the chief selling point for me as an American. Somaliland shows that it affirms the attitude and the philosophy which Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have made with regard to foreign assistance. Foreign assistance should not simply be an entitlement. Foreign assistance should be something that's given in case of disaster, for example. But in a functioning society, those societies need to take charge of their own problems. And that really is the lesson of Somaliland.
It's very simple. Who are our friends? Who are our partners? And who are simply dependents? And who are simply interested in undermining us? Who are our adversaries and who are our enemies? It's very dangerous to get confused about these things. And a foreign policy that's coherent understands these things and sees them through clear eyes, or so it seems to me. And I think it's very clear that Somaliland is a friend, a partner, and we should be recognizing it and working with the people of Somaliland to pursue common interests. We can leave it there. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Bashir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everybody.
Alrighty, I got me a hot dog here. Don't know if I'll eat it on cam. I might not. Vaughn, why do you eat on cam? Because it drives the trolls insane. They absolutely, I mean, there'll be 50 fucking hate videos. Vaughn Helton ate a hot dog. You know, it's like, what the hell? But yeah. Anyways, I got two maps up here. The first map is the Muslim conquest. Second map is the Crusades. What is wrong with this picture? Say it with me, class. The Crusades are a joke. The Crusades are a joke. Look at it. Look at it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12, almost 13. Because that white one is a new one, you know. 12, almost 13 crusade battles compared to all the Muslim conquest battles that took place. Now, if you look at this map and you still say the Crusades were a significant thing in world history, I'm going to laugh at you. Because obviously they weren't. They were a joke. The Pope literally sat on his ass and watched Persia be destroyed, Constantinople be destroyed, many of the pagan countries and Christian and Jewish enclaves, watched them all be destroyed. Watched billions of people get slaughtered, and he sat on his fat ass and did nothing. But then finally, when Jerusalem got sacked by the Muslims, then the Pope says, hey, maybe we got a problem here. And finally decides to get off his lazy fat ass and do something. But even when he did, look at it. Look at it. It's a joke. The Crusades are a fucking joke. Anybody that brings up the Crusades is either has an agenda or they're a fucking moron. Look at the map comparison. The Crusades are a joke. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not belittling the soldiers that fought, bled, and died to try and stop Islam. Congrats to them. At least they fucking tried. But I mean, holy shit. Anybody with a second grade education can look at these two maps and easily see that Islam is far more of an importance than the Crusades ever thought about being. Notice also that Islam went all the way up into fucking Europe. Notice that. All that that tan up there, that's Europe, okay? Spain, France, Italy, Sicily, Greece, all the way, they literally, and each one of them red dots, folks, the Muslims planted a mosque at each one. Because a mosque is not a church. A mosque is a symbol of victory over the infidel. Because the Quran is not a holy book. It is not a religious book. The Quran is a book of world conquest. It is a book of war, literally. You could set Sun Tzu's Art of War and the Quran down. They're almost a perfect match. Why? Because it's that way by design. The Quran is a book of world conquest, and they place a mosque everywhere that one of these red fucking dots is. The most notable one is the one they built in Spain, which is just fucking huge. It was a mega mosque, okay? Because they had scored a major victory over the infidel. Oh, and what did the Muslims do after 9/11? Oh, yeah. They got you stupid Americans to let them build a mosque in New York City. The exact same place where they attacked us on 9/11. Well, Von Helton, 9/11 was perpetrated by the Bush family and other elements of our government. Yeah, but Saudi Arabia was involved also. How many bombs did we drop on Saudi Arabia? Oh, yeah, none. Zero. Nada. Zip. We went after Saddam Hussein. Did Saddam Hussein attack us on 9/11? No. No, he didn't. What about Muammar Gaddafi? Did he attack us on 9/11? No. Why did we go after Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi? Because they refused to let a Rothschild bank be in their country. And so we killed them. Now, I can't speak for Saddam Hussein because he was hung. But Muammar Gaddafi's body wasn't even fucking cold when they broke ground on a Rothschild bank in Libya. Google it. Google it. His body wasn't even fucking cold, folks. Yeah. They refused to allow Rothschild Bank in Iraq and in Libya. And so we killed him. Dead as a mackerel. Saddam Hussein was hung, and Muammar Gaddafi was also killed. I don't know if they hung. Did they hang him, or did they just drag him on the street and beat his ass? I don't remember. Anyway, point being, they are both dead because they refused to allow a Rothschild bank in their country. That's the truth. Now, nobody's going to tell you that, particularly the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is bought and controlled by the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. Actually, 5 corporations run all the media of the world. Did you know that? Yeah, Google it. It's true. All right, so this here, if this does not shock you into a major dose of reality, I don't know what will. So the next time somebody gets in your face and whines and cries about the damn Crusades, point them to this map and say, "You're an idiot," and then laugh at them and then walk on, because they are. Obviously, the Crusades pale in comparison to the mass slaughter that Islam has perpetrated on the world. And that's just back in the past. That's not counting all the people they've killed in this century and past centuries. For 1,400 years, Islam has been good at one thing and one thing only. What is that, Bond? That is killing people. It's been very, very good at that. Very good. But yeah, most if not all of them red dots, there's a mosque there. Because a mosque is not what you think. See, everybody thinks, oh, a mosque is like a church or a synagogue. No, it's not. The purpose of a mosque is a celebration. It is a victory building to celebrate the victory over the infidel in that battle. That's what it's for. That's why the Muslims built a mega mosque in Spain as a symbol of their victory over the Spanish people. And if I was the Spanish people, I would immediately want to tear that fucker down. But see, the Spanish people, like the stupid Americans, don't understand what the purpose of a mosque really is. And so they're like, oh, yeah, go ahead and build your mosque. No, No, you don't understand. Building a mosque is a slap in your face. It means you've been conquered, motherfucker. That's what a mosque means. When they build a mosque in your town, it means you've been conquered. That's what it means. Stupid New Yorkers. And I can say that I lived there. So fuck you. I lived in New York. I was a citizen. In fact, I was more of a citizen of New York than Hillary Clinton was. Oh, did I say that out loud? Holy shit. Yeah, I did, didn't I? Anyway. But yeah, anytime the Muslims build a mosque, that is a symbol of victory over the infidel. It is a symbol that they have conquered you. Oh, and I hear thunder. Anyway, I better make this brief because I'm hearing thunder. All right. So to wrap this up, before I get electrocuted and all that good shit, you know, the next time somebody throws the Crusades up in your face, laugh at them. I do. I laugh at them. Anytime somebody throws the Crusades up, I just laugh at them. I say, well, you're an idiot or you have an agenda or both. Right? I mean, look at the maps. Look at the maps for yourself. There is no question that the Crusades were a fucking joke. They just were. It's sad, but it's true. Okay? That's the truth. Anyways, that's what I wanted to show you. I wanted to get this out of the way. And the next time somebody comes up and throws the Crusades up in your face, just laugh at them and walk the fuck on. That's the best advice I can give. Because, like I said, they either got an agenda or they're a fucking idiot. One or the other. Because the Crusades, clearly, according to these maps, were a fucking joke. I mean, they just are. All right. All right. Anyways, that's going to do it. I'm hearing thunder, and I haven't seen no lightning yet, but I'm hearing thunder. So I'm going to get the hell out of here. Y'all have a pleasant day and a better tomorrow. Bye-bye.